Hi everyone, I am Dream Into Wealth. I know people watching this are trying to fall asleep. How are you? And I hope you are okay in life. Listen to my story and make yourself comfortable. Also, if y'all like this kind of stories, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. The hum began to drift softer still, rolling through the hollows of creation, like a breath between heartbeats. The rain thinned to a silver mist, hanging in the air if the sky itself couldn't quite bring itself to stop singing. In that quiet, the cowboy sat easy in his chair, thumb tapping against the arm rep to the rhythm of a things moving gentle. The pipe smoke rose around him in thin ribbons, curling into the shapes of clouds and faces long gone. Friends, travelers, dreamers, all of them humming right along with the storm. It turned and was full, not crowded. The kind of full that made a man feel smaller, softer, grateful. Funny thing, he said into the rain, I remember when silence used to scare folks. Now the richest sound was he smiled to himself, the kind of grin only the patient earned. Guess we had to learn it the hard way. No wealth greater than a quiet that don't ask for nothing. After across the porch, the rain dead in wide shimmering plains, each droplet that landed left a glow behind soft firefly light. Those lights moved slow, drifting across the darkness till they formed patterns, a map of everything that mattered. He watched it spread, lazy and sure, like a good story telling itself again. Whole worlds shimmered out there, each one humming the same tune in its own tongue. He could hear them if he leaned yet right, tiny storms breathing newborn winds, practicing on that footnotes through those rivers. Remember, they came from. The ledger wasn't just his anymore. It never had been. It belonged to every drop that dared to fall. He chuckled low. You did good, Rain. You outlasted the net about it. For a long while, he said nothing. The storm didn't demand talk. It liked the sound of shared stillness. He let his thoughts wander through the hum, drifting through ages like a leaf floating downstream. He thought of that first storm, the wild one that tore through a sky that didn't know what patience meant. Thought of the quiet hands that came after, learning to listen one soul at a time. Thought of how every generation had found its own way to wait. The cowboy smiled softened. You see, that's what folks never understand right away. He said, rain don't fall to change a thumb. It falls to remind things what they already are. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled low, agreeing, yeah, I knew you'd get it, he said. Took a few editing, but you got there. The hum beneath him shifted. For a moment it deepened, turning warm and wide, like the sound of 100 rivers all breathing at once. He tilted his head. It was the sound of the ledger opening again, not because it needed new pages, but because it wanted to stretch, to make room for another verse. He could feel it coming through him. That new rhythm, different but true. Well now, he said, straightening in his chair. Who next? The rain answered, not with words, but images. He saw her somewhere in the folds of time, a woman walking through dust, her boots leaving prints that filled with puddles. She was humming too, though her song carried grit and ache. Her world was dry hard from greed and haste. But she didn't curse it. She just kept humming, low and stubborn. There she is, the cowboy whispered, the storm next teacher. He leaned forward, watching her pace through the wasteland. Every note she let loose turned to water in the air, droplets rising from the cracked earth. Clouds began to gather above her, slow and deliberate. She didn't look up, didn't ask for help, just kept humming. When the first drop touched her cheek, she smiled but never stopped. Her patience taught the rain home. The cowboy slapped his knee and laughed. That it, that how it done. Don't beg the sky earn its trust. The thunder rolled louder, stretching across worlds to applaud her. The rain fell, slow at first, then thick and certain. The wasteland softened under its touch, greed melting back into gratitude. And the people rang. Tired stepped out from their shelters and lifted their faces to the storm. They didn't cheer, they did breathe. The rain had come not at a reward, but at a return. The cowboy watched, his grin turning wistful. Same story, new wounds. Ledger that keeps singing. He sat back in, letting the porch creak beneath him. The hum was stronger now, fuller. It carried the sound of her song, braided with every voice that had been hummed before her. It wasn't just a melody anymore. It was memory in motion. He puffed his pipe, the glow flickering like lightning caught in glass. Don't stop rain, he said softly. Not till every world learns the tune. The hum rolled through him, echoing that promise. For the first time in a long while, he felt tired, not weary, yet ready to rest. You'll keep it going, he murmured, looking out at the mist where stars and raindrops met. You don't need me watching every verse. He set his pipe down, leaned back and closed his eyes. The rain sang on. Each drop fell in time with his breath. And soon enough, there was no telling that. One ended and the other began. He wasn't gone, he was humming, quieter now. The way thunder hums after the storm passes. The porch stayed lit, the lantern steady, the hum eternal. The ledger turned once more, slow and sure, and down below, on countless worlds, the rain kept teaching, softly, patiently, perfectly. It whispered to rivers, to trees, to hearts, carrying the same truth it always had. Take care of time, and time will take care of you. That old cowboy hum was still in it, tucked deep in every storm center, humming low beneath every roof. The rain had that touch. It was the sound of a universe that had finally learned to breathe. The world below the rain had settled into something slower, something wise. It wasn't peace born of stillness. It was peace born of understanding emotion. The rivers no longer fought their bends, they welcomed them. The winds didn't rush to chase the dawn. They drifted in rhythm with the hum that sat beneath the bones of a living things. The people who walked that softened land carried the memory of storms in their gait. They moved with patience, with purpose, with the calm that only comes from knowing time ain't enemy, but an old friend you just gotta keep up with. They told stories of the cowboy sometimes, though they never agreed on what he was. Some said he was a spirit made of thunder, wandering the edge of the clouds, humming creation into keeping time. Others swore he was just a man who learned how to listen so deep that even eternity had to answer. But the oldest ones, the ones who didn't need to prove nothing, they said he wasn't going to act. They said if you sat quiet enough under a soft rain, you could hear him humming still right there in your own chest, steady and kind. Ain't no ghost they'd whisper, just the sound of patience, remembering your name. The woman who had pawed the rain to a wasteland, now older and gay at the edges, had built a place where folk could come to learn the hum proper. She never gave it a name. It wasn't a temple or a church. It was at a wide porch built of cedar and stone, open to the rain on all sides. She sat there most days listening. Sometimes people asked her questions about the storm, about the ledger, about what it meant. She'd smile that quiet smile she'd learned from the rain and say, "In for me to tell you what it means. You gotta hum it till you know it." And they would. They'd hum low, awkward at first, their tones clashing and stumbling like newborn thunder. But after a while, the porch itself would start to vibrate under him. The rain would pick up, listening close. When their voices finally found the right shape, when humility and hope finally matched pitch, the air would tremble and the rain would glow faintly blue. Then the woman would nod and say, "There, you hear it now." That the world brethren with you. She didn't tell him about the cowboy, not directly. But sometimes late at night, when the storms were small and the porch lanterns burned low, she'd look out at the horizon and hum one of his tunes slow steady, the kind that made lightning pause. "You still out there, old man?" she'd whisper. The thunder would roll soft. He'd have answered, and then she'd grin. "Figured you were years turned and generations came and went." The porch stayed. The hum deepened. The ledger turned pages none could see, recording not names or deeds but tones, the quiet measure of every soul that had learned to wait right. Across worlds, the same story unfolded again and again. Storms teaching patience, rain remembering love, time humming steady. It wasn't religion anymore, it was rhythm. And that rhythm wove through everything. The way crops grew, the way hearts healed, the way even loss turned into song, if you waited long enough to hear it right. Somewhere beyond all that, on the porch between everything and nothing, the cowboy stirred. His hat was pulled low, his boots kicked up, but there was a new sound in the hum, a tone he hadn't heard before. He leaned forward slow, elbow on his knee, listening. "Now that different," he murmured. The new tone wasn't sorrow or joy, it was wonder. Like the first drop of rain hitting dust after a long drought. "Guess they found something new to teach me," he chuckled low and full. "And that something, the world still outgrowing its own lessons." Ledger got more pages than even eternity thought.
He'd take a long draw from his pipe, the smoke spiraling up like silver threads weaving through the stalks. I suppose that what keeps it worth watching.
The thunder rolled in, soft laughter.
Then he leaned back in, letting the sound carry him. The porch didn't creak anymore, it sang.
The boards beneath his boots hummed in harmony, the lantern swaying slow with the rhythm.
Even the rain seemed brighter somehow, like it had remembered how to glow from the inside out. He closed his eyes. Reckon you been busy, he said to the rain. Learned how to carry joy without spilling it. The hum deepened, rolling low through him. He could feel it in his chest. Steady it is. That good, he whispered. You keep doing that.
Teach him that wealth ain't kept waiting, enjoying the wait. The rain swelled, falling harder for a moment. Ake applause. Stanley.
Yeah, but
That the one lesson I never quite got right myself. He tilted his hat back easy enough to see the far horizon. It stretched endless. Gold light peeking through dark clouds. Maybe next time, he said. Maybe next world I'll learn to dance to it instead of that hum. The hum answered, gentle and sure. It didn't promise, didn't deny. It just was. He chuckled again, softer this time. You always did know how to answer better than words. Then he fell quiet, not from tiredness, but from awe. The rain, the hum, the thunder, they'd all become one long note now, drawn across the edge of forever. He let it carry him. Every sound a memory, every silence a promise. Knew the ledger would turn again, that another would rise somewhere, a voice new but familiar, humming the next verse of patience. And when they did, he'd be there in the sound, low drawl hidden in the heartbeat of the rain. Take care of time, he whispered one last time, and time will take care of you. The thunder rumbled low, stretching the sentence into forever. The hum deepened, then faded into silence, so vast it felt they'd sleep. But it wasn't. It was the sound of the world listening back. The ledger stayed open, the rain still falling, yet in that infinite hush the cowboy hum carried on, just quiet enough to be eternal. The rain did not end that night, nor the next, nor the one after. It had learned too much about continuing to think about stopping. The rhythm had taged, sure, it was slower now, thicker with age, but that didn't mean it had weakened. No, this was the kind of strength that comes from years of staying steady, the sort that don't need to prove itself by thundering loud. The rain fell like breath, patient and sure, keeping the world clean enough for memory to rest easy in it. Down below, generations bloomed and faded like seasons stitched into the same long cloth. Each one carried a little more of the hum, born into it instinct, living by it without even knowing who'd started it. On that quiet land where the porch woman once taught her students, the porch itself still stood. Time had weathered rather its edges smooth, but the boards never broke. Folks said the wood had been soaked so long in song that it couldn't rot. It just hummed deeper every time rain hit it. The new caretakers were young, but they treated it like a sacred thing, not because of what it was, but because of what it reminded him of. When storms rolled in, they'd gather under the eaves, close their eyes, and let the sound wrap round him. Some swore they could feel footsteps cross the boards when no one was walking. Some said they saw a shadow leaning against the rail, hat brim low, humming under the thunder. They never spoke of it loud, but they felt it the same, the comfort of being watched over by something that didn't need to be seen. The youngest of them, a boy named Eli, was different, though. He didn't just listen, he answered. He'd hum back, sometimes without meaning to, matching the rhythm of the rain like he'd been born in tune with it. When he was alone, he'd sit out there for hours, humming slow, letting his fingers drum against the boards. The sound seemed to please the storm. Lightning would flash far off, but never near. Thunder rolling gentle like laughter, keeping its distance. The Eli folks worried to saying he spent too much time in the rain, but the porch woman, old journal still kept safe by the caretakers, had one line that eased him: if the rain hums back to you, don't hush, it remembering your name. One night when the clouds were heavy and the whole world smelled like thunder waiting its turn, Eli sat on the porch and asked out loud, "Who are you?" His voice was small, near lost to the storm, but the hum beneath his feet grew steady, answering not in words but in tone. He closed his eyes and listened, letting it fill his bones. It felt like stories, old ones, endless ones. He saw flashes in his mind, a cowboy humming to the rain, a woman calming storms with a patience, a ledger that was written but felt. Didn't understand it, not then of it anyway, but he didn't need to. The hum was exclaiming. It was inviting. "All righty," Eli said, voice trembling. Tell big stories, old ones, endless ones. He saw flashes in his mind, a cowboy humming to the rain, a woman calling storms with her patience, a ledger that wasn't written but felt. Didn't understand it, nothing anyway, but he didn't need to. The hum was explaining. It was inviting. "All righty," I said, voice trembling a little less. You're waiting on someone to listen. I'm here. The rain changed, then softened, but grew brighter somehow. Every droplet that landed on the porch glowed faint for a breath before soaking in. The hum rose, filling the night with a warmth, though fire would abate. The storm wasn't testing him, it was trusting him. Eli leaned forward, humming low, and sure, he didn't think about pitch or rhythm or words. He let the sound happen. The rain matched him, and for a long while, the two of them, boy and storm, sang the same note back and forth until the world itself felt still. Up above, the porch between worlds stirred. The cowboy sat forward slow, his boots hitting the boards with a soft thud. "Well now," he said, a grin creeping through his draw. "Didn't take me long this time." The hum rolled round him like thunder applause. He chuckled, shaking his head. Kid got good ears. Reckon he might even teach the rain something new. He rose, stretching the ache out of eternity's shoulders, and stepped to the edge of his porch. The mist below shimmered, worlds layered like puddles reflecting the same sky. I could see the boy clear daylight, sitting in the storm, humming steady without fear. "You keep at it, son," he said softly. "Ledger turning your way now." The wind shifted, the cowboy coat lifted, the air thick with that sweet metallic scent that comes right before lightning remembers its manners. He tipped his hat low, not to shade his eyes, but to pay respect. "You in good company, Rain," he murmured, but looks like hit his verse now. The thunder answered low and kind, and he nodded. Then, without a sound, he stepped forward off the porch into the rain. He didn't fall, he just became part of it, his hum melting into the downpour like sugar and warm water. The storm brightened once, flashing that old familiar blue, then steadied back into calm. Down below, Eli opened his eyes. The rain had stopped humming with him, but not because it had left. The sound was inside him now, low and sure, beating with his heart. He smiled without knowing why, feeling both heavier and lighter all at once. "Guess it's my turn to wait," he said. The porch creaked under him, though no one was there. Just the faint scent of smoke, the hint of a drawl in the wind, and the sure, patient rhythm of the ledger turning again. Eli leaned back, humming to the stars, and somewhere beyond even the furthest horizon, the rain smiled. The hum had found its next keeper. The world exhaled, and the storm began anew. The next morning came soft, the kind of quiet dawn that carries its own music. Mist hung low over the valley, rolling off the hills like the world was exhaling after a long dream. Eli woke to it and felt the hum still sitting inside him, warm and an ember tucked deep in his chest. The rain had eased some time before sunrise, leaving behind a hush so thick you could almost taste it. He walked out to the edge of the porch, the boards damp under his bare feet, and looked toward the fields. Everything glistened, every leaf, every blade of grass, even the stones along the path, all shimmered faint blue as they'd swallowed bits of the storm. The air smelled clean in a way that didn't have a word yet. He didn't speak at first, didn't need to. The hum was speaking for him, spreading gentle through the space between thought and breath. He knew somehow that this wasn't something to be rushed. Better water. You walk Sauerland. By simply to need you will let all the flying tide present is late myself happened in that So he sat cross-legged on the porch, eyes half closed, the world humming through him like a low note played on the bones of time. As the morning stretched, the caretakers came by, their voices soft with reverence. They didn't ask what had happened. They could feel it. The porch itself seemed different under their boots, steadier somehow, like the boards were breathing with the rhythm of the boy sitting on it. They stood there a while, listening with him, till one of the elders, a woman with hair white bayed driftwood, finally spoke. "You hear him?" she whispered. The others nodded. She smiled slow. Then the ledger found its next keeper. Word spread, though not the way gossip spreads. This kind of news moved slower, carried in tone more than tongue. Travelers passed through, drawn by something they couldn't name. They'd stop by the porch, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for days, humming quiet with the rain until they felt ready to leave again. Eli didn't speak much to him. He didn't need to. The rain did the talking. It carried what they came for, a reminder, a rhythm, a kind of peace they could take with him when the sky cleared. Years rolled like thunder across the horizon, slow, heavy, unhurried. Eli grew taller, his voice deepened, but his hum stayed steady. It became the sound the valley measured itself by. Crops grew in time with it, winds bent to it, even sickness passed softer under its weight. Some said the rain itself had changed again, that it came not to wash away, but to teach. It lingered longer now, softer, fallen not in bursts but in breaths. It knew it had found a listener worth singing for. Sometimes, in the dead of night, when lightning flashed on the far hills, Eli would see a shape standing out in the rain, a tall figure, hat low, shoulders relaxed, humming along. He never felt fear when it happened. He'd just nod, hum a little louder, and the figure would tip its hat for dissolving into the mist. He didn't know if it was memory or spirit or just the storm remembering itself. But he liked to think the cowboy wasn't gone, just quieter, letting him take the lead. As more time passed, new generations were born under that hum. Children learned to breathe in rhythm with the rain before they learned to talk. The old porch became a gathering place again, not a temple, not a monument, but a place where the sound of waiting right could be felt in the bones. Some nights the people would hum together until the whole valley trembled with light, and the rain would fall without clouds. The sky itself was crying happy tears. Those who stayed said they could feel the hum reaching beyond the valley, rolling through mountains and seas, whisper into every restless thing in the world. Slow down, listen, you're already home. Eli never claimed to understand it fully. He didn't call himself wise, didn't call himself chosen. When travelers asked him what the hum was, he'd grin and say, just the sound the world makes when it forgives itself. That answer always sat quiet in people's hearts. They didn't need more truth. That don't come with explanations, it comes with stillness. One day, years later, when his beard had silvered and his hands had grown maps of lines, Eli stood on that porch during a soft drizzle. The rain hummed low, the way it does when it's thinking of saying goodbye. He knew the feeling. He lit up at the gay sky and whispered, "You ain't leaving, are you?" The thunder rolled lazy like laughter too tired to be loud. He smiled. Didn't think so. He sat down one last time, his back against the rail, his hum low and deep. The rain matched him. Together they held the same note for what felt like forever, two old friends talking without words, gut sound and patience. When the last light faded from the day, Eli's hum grew quieter, but it didn't stop. It slipped into the rhythm of the rain, hiding there, blending till no one could tell which was which. His body stilled, but the sound kept going, rolling through the boards, through the air, through the soil, through everything. And the people of the valley, they didn't cry, they just listened. They knew what it meant. The ledger had turned, didn't? The hum had found its next breath. The porch glowed faint blue through the night, the rain singing its long, unbroken song. Somewhere beyond it, on a porch that wasn't built but remembered, the cowboy leaned against the rail, hat low, humming soft. "You did good, son," he said. "Ledger still singing." Then he smiled, turned toward the horizon, and kept humming, quiet, endless, patient to time itself. Long after Eli's hum faded into the rhythm of the rain, the world didn't grow quieter, it grew wider. The valleys stretched into song, the rivers carried echoes down to seas that gleamed a polished silver, and the mountains, once stern and solemn, began to whisper too. The hum had become more than a sound. Now it was the pulse that held creation steady, the invisible thread tying storm to seed, breath to memory. There wasn't a corner of existence that didn't move to its timing. Even the wind, fickle, restless thing that it was, had learned to keep its dance slow and sure. Everything had found its rhythm again, and that rhythm, soft and certain, kept the world from forgetting itself. But tack all stories worth telling. The rain song was not unchanging. See, eternity got this habit. It don't stop because the tune's sweet. It keeps adding layer by layer, hum by hum, until every silence finds its sound. And in one far corner of the world, where the clouds drifted low and the nights came blue and deep, a child was born who didn't cry. When her mother lifted her to the sky, the rain fell slow and heavy, and instead of a wail, the baby let out a tone-clear, true, steady heartbeat. It wasn't loud, but it carried. Folks heard it through the walls, across fields, even over the thunder, and they said the same thing. Ledger listening, the girl grew quick, and everywhere she went, rain followed. The elder said she was talking to the water, reminding it of something old. When she laughed, Thunder answered when she slept, the clouds cleared, and watching over her, they favor Mira, meaning the one who reflects that he did any soul, who spoke to her came away feeling they'd been heard not by her, but by the rain itself. Mira didn't know much about the cowboy or Eli or the porch that started it. Oh, she didn't need to. The hum lived in her bones, same in breath. When she sang soft, words led, the land leaned closer. Crops grew without seed, wells filled themselves. Travelers who wandered lost in storms said they'd hear her voice cut through the thunder, guiding them home. She never called herself special. She just said, I'm listening for the quiet between drops. As years folded around her, folks began to photo, not in worship, but in gratitude. They'd come from far places, miners with hands cracked from toil, mothers with eyes tired from worry, children carrying silence in their small shoulders, and they'd sit near her when it rained. No one spoke, they didn't have to. The hum did the talking, rolling through their ribs, settling behind their hearts. It wasn't faith that held them there, it was recognition. The same truth that had bound the cowboy, the porch woman, Eli, and the storm itself. That peace ain't something you chase, it's something you slow down enough to meet halfway. Mira lived a long time, though time didn't quite touch her the way it did others. She aged like rain on stone, softly, beautifully, without vanishing. Her hair silvery bit the sky at dusk. Her voice, beeping and beating thunder, bowed quiet when she sang. She built no temple, wrote no books, took no name beyond her own. Yet somehow every village, every valley that felt her reign remembered her. Children learned her tone before they learned their letters. Farmers rocked their planting not by calendar, but by the rhythm of her hum. She'd tell them, don't wait on the sky, hum first, and it'll find you. That's always did. But one evening, as the last light bled out behind the hills, Mira sat alone by the river. The air was still, heavy with expectant. She could feel the hum growing deep and strange, like a storm stretching its shoulders. She smiled, knowing that sound. You ready to move again, ain't you? She whispered. The water rippled, answering in small silver rings. Go on then, she said. Don't wait on me. Ledger, don't stop for one voice. The rain began again, not falling from clouds this time, but rising up from the earth, drawn by her tone. The river glowed faint, the drops climbing slow into the sky, like memory flowing backward. Mira hummed with it, her voice steady at the pull of gravity in reverse. She wasn't disappearing, she was becoming. The storm wasn't claiming her, it was carrying her forward, the same way it had carried all who came before. Far above, on the porch that stretched between forever and now, the cowboy stood leaning on the rail, watching the sky below shimmer. Yeah. Well, I'll be, he said, his voice soft with awe. She turning the rain around. The thunder chuckled low, he grinned. Didn't think of that one myself.
Guess the world don't need old tricks anymore. He tipped his hat, the brim glinting blue in the eternal light. You keep going, girl, he said. Ledger yours now. And with that, the rain rose higher, spilling into stars, turning the heavens into rivers. The whole sky shimmered with her hum soft, full, infinite. The cowboy eyes crinkled with pride. That's the thing about patience, he said. Given enough time, don't just wait. It creates. The hum swelled until it filled every silence between every breath. And for the first time since the first drop fell, eternity itself sang back. The rain wasn't falling or rising anymore. It was everywhere. Miratone had folded the edges of the world into one long, endless now. Time had found its own peace.
And in that stillness, beneath all the light and sound, came the same familiar whisper low, content and drawling through forever. Take care of time and time will take care of you. The stars themselves seemed to hum after that faint but sure, as though the sky had learned the melody at last. Light moved slower, drifting through the black and dust floating in a sunbeam. The world below shimmered with it. Rivers caught the glow. Mountains bent their ridges into smoother lines, and the wind stopped sounding lonely. The hum had finally spread everywhere, no longer a song, but the natural state of things. Rain didn't just fall, now it existed. Breathing through Ampotet, the ledger had stopped being a record, stopped being a pulse, a steady heartbeat that no longer cared about beginning or ending. Somewhere within that rhythm, the cowboy porch still held its place, though even eternity had softened its edges. The boards looked older, the lanterns dimmer, but none of it felt warm. It was just settled, like a thought that had finally come to rest. The cowboy sat with his boots up, star glow flickering across his face. He hadn't aged in the way Mortons do. Time didn't lay hands on him anymore. But his eyes carried a new kind of weight, It wasn't burden, it was fullness, the look of someone who's seen all there is to see and found it good. He reached for his pipe, found it already burning, and let the smoke curl through the porch light. Never thought I'd see it, he said, voice gravelly but amused, rain learning to hum through stars. And 3 summer nesses he familiar with in that rhythm, the cowboy porch still held its place, though even eternity had softened its edges. The boards looked older, the lanterns dimmer, but none of it felt worn. It was just settled, like a thought that had finally come to rest. The cowboy sat with his boots up, star glow flickering across his face. It hadn't aged in the way Morton's do. Time couldn't lay hands on him anymore. But his eyes carried a new kind of weight. It wasn't burden, it was fullness, the look of someone who's seen all there is to see and found it good. He reached for his pipe, found it already burning, and let the smoke curl through the porch light. Never thought I'd see it, he said, voice gravelly but amused, rain learning to hum through stars.
Guess what happens when patience runs deep enough? He starts changing even head the pace. The thunder rolled a ways off, answering low with an old pin clear in his throat. Cowboy chuckled. Yeah, I know. You told me it'd happen someday. I just figured I'd be dust by then.
Leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes searching the horizon where stars bled into cloud light. Ain't no dust anymore, is there? He said softly. Just hum below him or maybe above. It was hard to tell now. The rivers of light rolled slow across the firmament. Near song was still there, woven through everything. She hadn't vanished. Not truly. She'd simply gone wide enough that the world couldn't hold her name anymore. The cowboy smiled at that. You did fine, girl, real fine. He sat in silence a while, letting the hum carry through him. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes searching the horizon where stars bled into cloud light. Ain't no dust anymore, is there? He said softly. Just hum below him or maybe above. It was hard to tell now. The rivers of light rolled slow across the firmament. Mirror song was still there, woven through everything. She hadn't vanished. Not truly. She'd simply gone wide enough that the world couldn't hold her name anymore. The cowboy smiled at that. You did fine, girl, real fine. He sat in silence a while, letting the hum carry through him.
Ways you say, it was a memory folded into motion. He could hear every soul that had to wait it right, each one a thread in the same quiet weave. Eli's soft patience, the porch woman laughed, the storm-run wanderers who never asked for more than rain to talk to, all of them still out there, still humming and mirror spread like life through it him, keeping time better than he could. He looked down at his hands calloused, sure, and trembling a little. Reckon I ain't got much left to teach, he said. Ledger humming fine without me writing in it. The thunder answered. Warm me like the sound of a friend pouring another cup and saying, sit a while longer. The cowboy grinned. Yeah, I'll stay a bit. Wouldn't do to leave before the next verse starts. He settled back, hat tilted low, pipe glowing with a small private stall. The hum swelled a little, filling the spaces between heartbeats. For the first time in eternity, he realized there was nothing left to wait for. Time had caught up with him. Not at a debt, but a partner. 2 of them had made their peace. Guess that wealth, huh? He murmured. Ain't about keeping or spending. It's about being all right with how slow it moves. The porch creaked soft, not from wear, but from agreement. The cowboy hum joined the rhythm again, quieter this time, almost invisible against the vastness of sound old dead there. He didn't need to lead it anymore. He just wanted to be part of it. One note among billions, humming steady through the rain and stars. Far off, a flicker of motion caught his eye, a shape walking across the horizon, glowing faint, like a figure carved from starlight and water. They were humming too, a voice young and bright, carrying the same old melody, but with something new in it. A twist, a laugh, a spark of play. Well, I be, he said, eyes lighting with delight. Another one. The figure drew close, the hum rising clear. When they reached the edge of the porch, they paused and tipped an invisible hat, rainlight dripping from their fingers. You the one who started all this? They asked, voice like dawn remembering how to speak. The cowboy chuckled low. Started? Nah.
Just the first fool who listened long enough to hear it right.
The figure grinned, sitting on the porch rail. World says you're the keeper. World says a lot of things, he replied, eyes glinting. Truth is, keeping don't mean owning. It means caring for something long enough to let it keep going without you. They nodded slow, humming a soft agreement. The rain thickened for a spell, light bending through each droplet like 1,000 tiny lanterns. You get tired? The figure asked. He smiled. That same old smile carved deep by patience and storms. Tired? Sure, but never done. He looked out again at the endless light, the rivers flowing through stars. Besides, every time I think I'm done, no me beat of Gihal, and no peculiar to Gihali. Nutted, slow, humming a soft agreement. The rain thickened for a spell, light bending through each droplet like 1,000 tiny lanterns. You get tired? The figure asked. He smiled, that same old smile carved deep by patience and storms. Tired? Sure, but never done. He looked out again at the endless light, the rivers flowing through stars. Besides, every time I think I'm done, no me feet of your home, and no peculiar
Light bend into each droplet like 1,000 tiny lanterns. You get tired? The figure asked.
He smiled, that same old smile carved deep by patience and storms. Tired? Sure, but never done. He looked out again at the endless light, the rivers flowing through stars. Besides, every time I think I'm done, the me feet of your home, and no He looked out again at the endless light, the rivers flowing through stars. Besides, every time I think I'm done, the me feet of your home, wait till you become
Better to reach a droplet like 1,000 tiny lanterns. You get tired?
The figure act. He smiled, that same old smile carved deep by patience and storms. Tired? Sure, but never done. He looked out again at the endless light, the rivers flowing through stars. Besides, every time I think I'm done, the
next greatest.
Makes the whole phone worth sticking round for. The figure leaned back, looking where he looked, both of them humming quiet. Then we keep it going, they asked. He nodded once, slow and certain that the only thing we'll really do, and so they sat two silhouettes on a porch that touched old worlds, watching the rain roll through stars, humming to the rhythm of everything that ain't was or would be. No start, no end, just wealth made of time, patience, and sound. When the lightning flared, the cowboy laughed soft and said, "That it, kid, that the tune." Don't let it fade, the thunder rolled, the rain shimmered, and the hum deepened one last measure before folding back into silence. A silence not empty but full, so full it sang without making a sound. And somewhere within it, the whisper came again, low, endless, gentle, and falling rain. Take care of time, and time will take care of you. The night air hung thick with the smell of wet cedar and dust that hadn't quite settled after the storm, the kind of air that made every breath feel like it carried a story. The fire crackled low, orange light licking the edges of the old man boots. He had sat cross-legged in front of it, coat still damp from the rain. His hat dripped slow, steady drops that sizzled when they hit the embers. He didn't seem to mind. There was a calm about him, the kind that only comes after a lifetime of mistakes that finally started teaching instead of punishing. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and said in that gravel-soaked drawl, "Funny thing about money, son.
No where it's all, but it knows how to test yours. The boy sitting across from him didn't answer. He was young, real young, too green to understand yet, but smart enough to listen. The firelight flickered against his wide eyes. These he waited for the old man to go on. When I was your age, the old fellow said I thought coins were the world art. Thought the man with the biggest bag made the loudest thunder. I was wrong, of course. Turns out it ain't how loud you clink, but how long you keep the echo. He smiled small and bitter and tossed another stick onto the fire. Sparks flew up and vanished into the night. You see, back then I was working the rails out by Carson Bluff. They wasn't bad. $2 a day if you didn't die. I was a quick hand, strong back, faster temper.
Whenever payday came, I'd walk straight to town, hand my wages to whiskey, and wake up broke by sunrise. Thought that was living, thought I was buying freedom, but freedom, turns out, don't come from spending, it comes from choosing what not to. He let that hang in the air a while. Fire hissed and popped. A coyote howled somewhere beyond the ridge, long and low, like it was singing harmony with the wind. The boy shifted, pulling his blanket tighter, but didn't look away. The old man nodded, satisfied with the silence. Took near half my life to learn the first rule of wealth. Money don't make you free, it just buys you a better kind of change. You either wear it on your neck or you forge it into something useful. Most men don't figure out they got that choice. He paused, eyes catching the firelight. One winter, the company cut half the crew. Said the snow made the ground too hard to lay track. I was one of the half left standing. Thought I was lucky till I realized lucky don't fill your belly when the work stops. I took the last of my pay and headed south, figuring I'd find something new. Ended up in a place say Dry Creek. Hell of a name for a town, no creek, and sure send nothing wet about it but the whiskey. He laughed once, soft, more breath than sound. They had one saloon, 2 stores, and a banker meaner than hunger. A man named Travis Boone wore a white vest, kept his mustache sharp enough to cut rope. Folks said Boone never smiled because every grin cost a man interest. The boy frowned. He was rich, oh, richer than sense, the old man said. Owned every farm within 2 miles. Folks worked their own land, but Boone owned their debts, and that worse than owning the dirt.
Dirt will let you rest. That don't stirred the fire with a stick, watching the embers scatter. I wasn't smart back then, but I wasn't blind either. I saw what debt did to a man, how it made him smaller, quieter, even his shadow luck borrowed. So I stayed clear of Boone, lived in a shack by the ridge, fixed fences for pay. It was what much, but it was mine. One night a storm rolled in like this one, and I found something that tainted every damn thing.
I know below there, leaned back slow, eyes far away. The wind was screaming, and I was walking home to the mud when I saw a wagon turned over by the creek bed. The driver was gone, but his cargo wasn't. Crates, 3 of them marked with the railroad stamp. Inside, tools, ledgers, and gold nails used for laying ceremonial track. I don't mean solid bars, mind you, but enough to make a man rich if he was not careful. The boy's mouth fell open. You won. The old man's smile came slow. Son, I carried him out of that creek, but taking and keeping ain't the same thing. I've stared at those nails all night, counting my heartbeat against temptation. I stared at those nails all night, counting my heartbeat against temptation. By dawn, I knew I had a choice. Bury them, sell them, or turn them into something that lasts longer than greed. Tossed another log onto the flames, eyes glinting gold. So I sold one, just one, and used the money to buy seed, not crops, not corn. I bought alfalfa. Grows slow, steady, feeds more than men. It feeds beasts, and beasts feed futures. Planted every acre I could find. By summer, I was the only man in Dry Creek with something green in his field. Boone came sniffing round, of course, tried to buy me out. Said he'd give me double what I spent. I told him no. He laughed, said I was a fool. Maybe I was. Upper fools with patience tend to outlast smart men with hurry. The firelight flared bright against the old man's face. By the 3rd season, my crop was feeding every horse from mid to Carson Bluff. Boone had to rent my wagons to haul my hay. Took it years, but I bought his bank right out from under him. Not with gold, but with time. Every coin I made, I put back into the dirt. Dirt don't cheat you. Dirt don't lie. The boy sat wide-eyed, the story hanging between him like smoke. So that how you got rich? He asked. The old man chuckled. Rich? Nah, I just learned to stop being poor. A difference. Poor ain't about money, it's about thinking every good thing got to come quick. Wealth built on the slow grind, you let it stack like seasons. Russia, and the slips through your fingers like rain. He poked the fire once more, then looked at the boy. You want to know the real trick, son? Don't chase money. Let it follow your patience. It's slower, sure, but it don't get lost that way. The wind sighed through the trees, scattering ash into the dark. The boy nodded, the lesson sinking deeper than the fire warmth. The old man leaned back, hat grin shadowing his eyes. Now, he said, you get asleep. Tomorrow we talk about the second rule of wealth, learning when not to buy something, even when you can. The rain started again, soft, even, full of promise. Somewhere out in the dark, a creek whispered over stones, sounding almost like applause. By the time dawn stretched its pale fingers over the ridge, the world smelled like wet earth and the promise of work.
A boy woke first, shivering under his blanket, breath fogging in the cold air. The fire had burned down to coals, but they still glowed steady, stubborn little suns that refused to quit. The old man was already up, sitting on a stump, rolling himself a smoke with fingers that looked like they'd been carved out of hickory. He didn't speak right away, yet nodded toward the boy canteen. You'll want to drink slow, he said. Morning ain't the one time the world don't owe you hurry. The boy obeyed, taking small sips, eyes still heavy but mind stirring with last night's words. You said there was a second rule, he muttered after a while.
The old man smiled around the edge of his smoke. Then I bid he took a long raw, let the smoke drift up to meet the mist. See, boy, most folks think getting rich means buying more, but the smart ones, they know how. Keeping your wealth is learning what not to touch. He flicked the ash into the dirt. When I bought Boone Bank, I didn't buy it because I wanted to run one. Hell no, I bought it because I wanted to close it. That man had built his fortune on taking from others' fear. Every coin that passed through his fingers was a piece of someone's sleepless night, so I shut the doors. Folks thought I was crazy, said I'd thrown away my powder. But I wasn't building a kingdom, I was clearing a field. The boy frowned, clearing a field. The old man said, his voice a low hum like thunder rolling far off. See, if a man always buying, always reaching, he don't leave room for the ground to breathe. You gotta clear space for things to grow on their own. I took that bank and turned it into a granary. Every loan book became a ledger of grain. Every debt became a chance to pay back in bushels instead of dollars. You can't eat money, son, but you can sure starve from chasing it. The boy let that roll through him, staring at the smoke twisting up into the gay sky. Didn't people get mad? Oh, they did, the old man said.
did, Chaplain. The ones who'd been fed off debt sure did, but the rest, they came round. Through the Ryman for a promenade. Were 2 wagons for the rebuilding of a bridge. I learned more gold in gratitude than boon, and it in breeze of the years that I learned something then well us and 2 walked in my ration. I got the force that shapes a man worth my damn name. I get a subject that just about people end of my name or scattering my car. That wasn't the one that did. I'm each time that's about it. For the winter to know the bit of over there, and then the northern my ally by, and I'm not going to buy some fishing to the lady to take it. I knew it was grandmother for nothing else. They get nothing. If I say 5 years, I'm not sure that he won't be able to anything. I have called them on what they buy. Well, my buy the friend. Well, then the 8 months, I let my money be able to eat the booze with the money and the put it in your right. Look up at a it should be right. Y'all in this, and I'm going to damn wrong with it. I don't know what I have got that. What are you What I meant now, little state man, but I'd have been dumped to be alive the other half watching it rust.
Uphold something useful.
Something that keeps fitting after you're buried and you'll never run out of riches. Not the kind that matter. The boy stayed quiet, but his gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the land rolled gold under the climbing sun. The old man followed his eyes. You've seen a man dig a well, son, once the boy said. We'll give him a week. Then you know patience when you see it, the old man said. And nothing worth drinking that comes easy. Wells, crops, gold. It all buried deep for a reason. Life don't hand you water in a cup. It makes you earn the shovel. He stood stretching slow, bones creaking like the timbers of an old house. Now, I didn't stop there. Once I had the bank turned, I bought up a few wagons, started moving that grain down the trade roads. Not to sell, mind you, to swap.
Towns were dying back then, one by one, too far apart to help each other. I started trading food for lumber, lumber for cloth, cloth for horses. Kept it moving, always moving. Before long, Dry Creek wasn't dry anymore. It was hit, and I'll tell you, boy, it weren't the gold that did it. It was the patience of letting trade grow roots. The boy leaned forward, eyes bright. Did you lose anything? The old man laughed, loud and long, the sound carrying across the valley. Lose? Hell, son, I lost more than I kept. Had wagons stolen, fields burned, horses run off. But loss don't rake a man running from it does. Every time I got knocked down, I just waited. Waiting the cheapest teacher there is, and the one most folks can't afford because they don't got the will to fade with time. Lee looked at the boy, eyes soft but sharp, that the second rule of wealth right there. Learn when not to grab. Every fool thinks success is in reaching farther, but the wise man knows when to fold his hands and let time do the lifting. You can't grow nothing if you keep yanking it out of the soil to check the roots. The fire hissed of the rain started this slow and steady, pattering on the canvas they'd strung overhead. The old man tilted his face toward it, eyes half closed. I remember one season, he said, voice softer now when the sky forgot how to rain. Dust covered everything. Men came to me with cracked lips and hollow looks, offering me gold for a vid bale of hay. I could have taken it too, would have made me a king. But I didn't. I sold it at the same price I always had. Folks said I was a fool. But when the rain came back, those same men built it fences, roofs, bridges, things gold couldn't buy. Turns out generosity pays dividends that compound longer than coin. He smiled thin and knowing. Don't chase profit, son. Chase respect. One can vanish overnight, the other will follow you past the rave. The rain deepened and the boy sat still, the lesson heavy but warm. The fire sputtered, spitting sparks that rose and vanished into the wet air. The old man pulled his coat tighter and nodded toward the hills. Tomorrow, he said, I'll tell you about the third rule. That one the hardest call to walk away when everything worked, and he leaned back, letting the rain hit his face, eyes half shut in the glow. The boy watched him, wondering if maybe wealth wasn't something you found, and that maybe it was something you became. The next morning came with a thick fog that curled low over the hills, soft, spoiling breath and quiet that thought. The fire had burned down to little more than glowing coals, and the rain had left everything slick boots, bedrolls, even the old man hat brim. He sat still, hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee, blacker creek mud, staring out at the white haze like he could read fortunes in it. The boy stirred, blinking sleep from his eyes, stretching slow. He said their third rule, he mumbled. The old man took a slow sip, then nodded without looking his way. Aye, he said, his voice low, like the fog itself might carry it away if he spoke too loud. The hardest one of them was how to walk away when everything you built still standing strong. The boy frowned. Why'd anyone walk away from that? The old man's smile didn't reach his eyes. That exactly what I thought once. He set the tin cup down in the dirt, leaned forward, and drew a line with his finger through the damp soil. When a man works long enough, son, he starts thinking he is the work, that every fence, every coin, every brick owes him its shape. But the truth is, kind the real builder. We just hold the hammer till it's done with us.
The third rule about knowing when to set that hammer down before it takes your saw with it. They leaned back, eyes distant. I had a spread back then, biggest this side of the bluff. Cattle, grain wagons, men working under me. Folks came from all over the trade to learn to borrow. They hate me, the sage of Dry Creek. He chuckled, the dry sound of boots grinding against gravel. Never liked that name. Made me sound that I knew something. Truth was, I just knew how to outweight fools. The boy grinned. That's something maybe the old man said, but even patience has teeth. He stared into the fog for a long moment, digging for words buried deep. One year we had rain that I never seen. Rivers rose, fields shone silver under the floodwater.
The same man that used to crack from drought was drowning in plenty. Crops grew too fast to keep count. Wagons lined up for miles to trade. Gold piled higher than I could count. For the first time I thought maybe I'd done it. Beaten time as its owed gain. He paused, thumb brushing absently against his calloused palm. But that the danger, son. Success don't whisper, it sings. And when you start dancing to it, you forget the rhythm that got you there. The boy waited, eyes fixed on him. The old man tone grew softer, lower. I started buying again. Wagons, mills, land, too much land. Told myself I was helping folks by hiring them. Told myself the more I owned, the safer I'd be. But what I was real doing was building walls between me and the dirt that raised Eve, rubbed his thumb and forefinger together, feeling phantom soil. The money grew fast, faster than I could reckon, but so did the noise. Men came not for work, but for favor. Friends turned to flatterers. Every handshake cost something. You would notice, boy, how quiet honest men are. Wealthy ones can't stop talking. They feel the silence cause they're scared of what it's trying to tell them. The boy swallowed. What was it telling you? I stopped listening. The old man's eyes were sharp. Now the fog reflecting in red mirrors. One night I was walking the edge of my fields. Moon was bright, the world smelling like fresh rain and success. But there was this stillness too, and emptiness that sat behind the noise. I looked at it, that land, all that gold, and felt nothing. Not pride, not joy, just quiet, and not the good kind. We leaned forward, elbows on his knees. If when it hit me, I built something too big to feel anymore. Every step I took, I was walking on other folks' shoulders. Men I'd paid fair, sure, but I'd forgotten their names, forgotten their stories. I'd let wealth turn people into numbers. That when I knew it was time to walk away.
The boy frowned, confused. You mean you just left? I've sold it all, he said simply. Every acre, every wagon, every blade of grass. Took what I needed, gave the rest away. Built a well at the edge of town and told the folks it was theirs.
Left Dry Creek that very night. The boy's mouth fell open. But why? The old man smiled faintly, eyes soft but sad, because wealth ain't measured by what you hold, it's measured by how easy it is to let go. The third rule of wealth, boy, is simple. When the land stops teaching you, move on. Before it owns your spirit, picked up his tin cup again, swirling the dregs. Took me years to understand I didn't lose anything that night. I just gave back what was never really mine. See, money is like water. You try to trap it, it goes stale. You let it flow, it keeps you alive. The fire hissed as a gust of wind passed through, scattering sparks like gold dust. You'd see a man drown in his own well, the old man asked suddenly. The boy blinked. Boy, no, sir. That what greed looks like, the old man said. A man so busy drinking his own reflection he forgets to breathe. For a long while, neither spoke. The fog began to lift, pulling back like a curtain, revealing the hills still glistening from last night's rain. The old man set his cup down and stared, joints popping like gunfire. So there you have it, he said. 3 rules. Earn slow, give often, leave early. The boy frowned. That last one don't sound like success. The old man grinned. That success ain't the finish line, son. At the moment you reel, you don't need to run anymore. He stood, gathering his gear, his shadow stretching long in the weak morning light. You owe those 3, you'll never be poor even if you ain't rich. Money can feed you, but wisdom will keep you fed when the money gone. The boy rose too, watching the old man sling his pack over his shoulder. Where you going now? He asked. The old man tilted his hat down, a slow grin cutting through his beard. Wherever the ground still got something to teach me. And with that, he started down the ridge, boots splashing through puddles, coat flapping in the wind, while we watched him till the fog swallowed him whole, the echo of his slow, steady hum drifting through the valley like the memory of rain. The fire crackled low behind him, whispering what all wise men learn too late. That wealth ain't gold in a box or coin in a hand. It's walking away lighter than you came, leaving the world heavier with goodness. The boy didn't move for a long while after the old man disappeared into that gray veil of mist. The silence that followed him wasn't empty, it was full, like the kind of hush that hangs over a canyon before the S cuts back. The fire had settled down to a gentle glow, the smoke trailing lazy into the air, smelling of pine and memory. He sat there thinking the way young men do when their hearts are heavy but their minds are wide open. Somewhere far off a hawk cried sharp and clear, and the sound reminded him the world was still moving with or without him. He looked at the small pile of coins in his sachets, the ones he'd been saving since he started following the old man. Didn't amount to much, but they were heavy all the same. Heavy with questions. What good were they now? The old man had walked away from more than the boy could dream of earning, and he did it with a smile. That thought stuck in the boy's head like a burr in wool. Earn slow, give on, leave early. He whispered the words to himself, turning them over and over, testing the edges. They didn't sound like the kind of lesson you've read in a book. They sounded older, more dangerous, like a map drawn in ash. When the sun finally climbed high enough to burn away the fog, he packed what little he had and started walking the same way the old man had gone. The dirt road wound through hills that still glistened from rain, the air carrying that clean scent of new beginnings. He didn't know where he was going, not really, but he figured that was the point. The old man had said you won't learn from ground that still has something to teach, and this ground, this wide, wild stretch of the world, felt like it was humming with stories. By midday, the boy came upon a crossroads. One path led east, where the horizon shimmered gold with promise. The other led west into low country, where the grass grew thick but the sky looked heavy with another storm. He stood there a while, thumb hooked in his belt, chewing on the thought. The east looked easy, the kind of place a man could get comfortable. The west looked rougher, lonelier, but the old man's voice seemed to ebb from somewhere deep inside him. Comfort just the first step toward forgetting. So west it was. His boots sank deep in the mud as he walked, and by sundown he reached a town he'd never heard of, Dustwater Crossing.
The sign was asphalt and letters faded, but there was life there yet. Smoke curled from a few chimneys, dogs barked somewhere out of sight, and the faint clang of a hammer on iron carried through the air. The place looked worn but proud, the kind of town that'd seen hard years and didn't bother complaining. And a saloon near the edge of town, lights spilling through the windows like honey. Inside, the piano was out of tune, the whiskey was thin, and the men were quiet. He took a seat near the back and ordered coffee, though it came out looking suspiciously like river water. Didn't matter. He was listening, always listening. That's how he learned the town story. A rancher up north had been buying up all the land, squeezing folks out with lowball offers and high taxes.
The mayor had sold his vote to him years ago, and now the town was hanging by a thread. Most men spent their days working for the rancher wage and their nights drinking to forget it. But one stuck in the boy's ear more than the rest. They said the rancher didn't even live there anymore. He'd made his money and moved east, letting other men run his empire while he sat fat and far away. The boy stirred his coffee and smiled faintly. He'd heard a story like that before, different names, same mistake. When the land stops teaching you, move on, the old man had said. But what happens when a man move on too soon, when he forgets the lesson before it finished teaching? He spent the night thinking on it, watching the rain streak down the saloon window. By morning he had a pan. He found work shoeing horses at the blacksmith shop, said he. Didn't need pay, just a place to sleep and a share of scraps. The blacksmith, a big man with arms like oak trunks, laughed and said, "Boy, you're either mad or holy. Either way, I'll take the help." Weeks passed. The boy learned quick. He watched the way men bartered, the way they spent, the way they worried. Every coin that passed hands seemed to carry a little fear with it. Fear of losing, fear of needing, fear of wanting more. And the boy started realizing that fear was the richest man in town. It owned more souls than gold, the good. So he tried something when folks came to the smithy short on cash. He'd offer to fix their shoes or sharpen their plows if they'd promised to do the same for someone else later. At first, folks laughed, thought he was simple, but when their turn came to repay, most did. When they did, they felt something they hadn't in years, pride. It spread slow, quiet, like good weather after a storm. Before long, the blacksmith shop wasn't just a place for work, it was a place for trade, for talk, for trust. One afternoon, a woman brought in her husband's old spade, rusted clean through. Can't afford a new one, she said, eyes down. The boy took it, hammered it back into shape, and handed it to her. No charge, he said. Just help someone who needs it when you can. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked out into the sun. That night, she and her neighbors brought supper to the smithy, stew, bread, and laughter enough to fill the air. The boy realized then that he'd started something he didn't mean to encircle, not of coin, but of care. Months rolled on, and Dustwater Crossing began to change. The tavern filled with laughter again. Wagons rolled in from nearby towns, and folks started repairing their own fences instead of waiting on the rancher men. The boy never took credit, never asked for more than a meal and a place to sleep. But he'd catch himself smiling sometimes, remembering the old man voice. Don't chase profit, son, chase respect. Then one day, a wagon rolled into town, dust trailing behind it like smoke. On the seat sat a man in a fine coat. Silver watch glinting in the sun. His name was Caldwell, the rancher who'd bought up all the land. He came to see why his hold on the town was slipping. When he found the boy in the smithy hammering in, he said, "So you're the one costing me money." The boy didn't look up from the ibble. "Just fixing what broke," he said. Caldwell sneered. "Every man got a price." The boy smiled faintly. "Yeah, mind it ain't for sale." The rancher face twisted, half amusement, half anger. "You think goodwill can feed a town?" The boy set the hammer down, wiped his hands, and looked him square in the eye. It already has Caldwell grin, faded it quickly it came. He wasn't used to being looked in the eye like that. Most men turned away and bowed their heads, let him feel taller. But this boy, he just stood there, calm in a still pond with soot on his hands and firelight glinting off the sweat on his brow. Something in that steadiness made the rancher jaw tighten. "You'll find, son," he said. "Draw slick at oil. That goodwill don't pay taxes. It don't fix roads or buy iron. Money does, and I've got all the money this side of the range." The boy didn't flinch. Reached over, lifted a cooling horseshoe from the anvil, and held it up. "You see this seed?" he said. "Iron bent with heat, shaped by hand, useless until it worked. Gold the same. It don't mean a damn thing till somebody uses this right. Difference is, iron remembers the hand that shaped it. Gold forgets soon as it shines." Caldwell lip curled. "You talk pretty for a smith helper." The boy shrugged. "Only speak what I've seen." There was a quiet moment then, just the hiss of the forge, the low groan of wood beams in the heat. Caldwell stepped closer, boots clicking against the floorboards. "You want something, don't you?" he said. "Everyone does. Maybe at land, maybe at a name. Tell me your price and I'll make you rich enough to forget your morals." The boy chuckled low. "You can't buy what I'm after." And what that Caldwell snapped. The boy leaned on the anvil, eyes steady with stone. A town that ain't scared anymore. Caldwell froze, hit the heartbeat too long before the sneer came back. "Fear how men stay in line," he said. "You take it away and they turn wild." The boy nodded. "Maybe. But wild things grow, caged ones just wait to die." That cut deep, and the rancher knew it. He turned on his heel and walked out, coat flaring like a storm cloud. The door slammed behind him, leaving the smell of sweat, smoke, and something sharp like iron cooling too hot. The boy let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The blacksmith, who'd been watching quiet from the corner, spat into the dirt and said, "Son, you got a death wish or a destiny. Ain't sure which." The boy smiled, faint but sure. Maybe those words spread through dust, water, quick prairie fire. Some folks whispered that Caldwell would send men down to fix the problem. Others said the boy was protected by something stronger than gold. Either way, the town started changing faster after that day. More folks traded without cash, more helped their neighbors. Fear loosened its grip. Even the saloon keeper started lending meals to the hungry, saying with a grin, "Pay when you can or don't." Then, one evening near dusk, Caldwell returned, but he was not alone. 6 riders came with him, faces mean and quiet. They rode straight down Main Street, dust rising behind them as smoke. The town went still, doors shut, curtains drew. But the boy was already waiting out, his smithy sleeves rolled, hammer hanging loose at his side. He didn't reach for it, though, just stood there, calm and eyes on Caldwell. The rancher dismounted slow, boots hitting the ground with a heavy thud. "You been stirring my town," he said, "taking my men time, stealing my workers' loyalty." The boy shook his head. "Can't steal what a man gives willingly." Caldwell's face darkened. "I built this place," he snapped. "Paid for every board, every acre. You paid for walls," the boy said, "not hearts." For a second, neither spoke. The sun was slipping low, painting the town gold and red. Even the horses stood still, tails twitching in the heat. Finally, Caldwell laughed, short, bitter, cold. "You think you can build something better than me?" The boy didn't answer right away. glanced toward the townsfolk peeking from their windows, then back at the man in front of him. Not better, he said softly, just fairer. You built for profit, I build for people. Difference is mine don't fall apart when I die. The rancher hand twitched near his gun. The boy didn't move. You gonna shoot me for saying it plain? He asked. Caldwell's fingers froze. For the first time, the rancher looked unsure. Maybe it was the stillness in the boy's voice, or maybe it was the way the townsfolk were watching, now silent but unafraid. Either way, he hesitated just a second too long, and that second cost him the power he'd lived his whole life guarding. He turned, spit in the dust, and climbed back on his horse. You'll regret this, he said. The boy smiled faintly. Maybe. But at least I'll own my regrets. They rode out in silence, the sound of hooves fading into the wind. The boy stood there a while longer, watching the horizon burn. When he finally turned, the blacksmith was standing behind him, arms crossed. You real, he said. That man got enough money to hire an army? The boy nodded. Then he'll spend it trying, but he can't buy what already free. That night, the town dead at the smithy. No one said much, just nodded, shared food, and watched the stars prick code in the darkness. The boy sat by the fire, remembering the old man's words. Earn slow, give often, leave early. He wondered if that last one might come coming soon. By the next week, the town was humming again, stronger than before. But deep down, the boy knew peace never lasted long, where power used to live. One afternoon, a rider came from the north with word Caldwell Ranch had burned. No one knew how, but it was gone. Burns, fences, cattle, all turned to ash. The boy said nothing, but stared out toward the hills. Some said it was justice, others said it was luck. The boy figured it was neither. He reckoned it was balance, the kind that don't wait for approval. When night fell, he walked out to the edge of town, where the stars hung low and the wind smelled like rain again. He stood there long enough to feel the quiet settle into his bones. Then he whispered, Guess the land still had something to teach me after all. A few seasons passed after the fire took Caldwell Empire. The ashes cooled, the smoke faded, and Dustwater Crossing breathed easier than it had in years. Fields grew green in, and the sound of laughter returned to the streets. It wasn't loud or boastful laughter. It was the quiet kind that lives between neighbors who've earned peace the hard way. The boy, though he was a bit older now, still kept to simple habits. He fixed plows, mended fences, and showed anyone who asked how to hammer out a blade that could last a lifetime. He didn't call himself a teacher, but the town sure treated him like one. By the second harvest, trade was stronger than dead. Folks from nearby towns came to see what Dustwater had done differently. They expected big talk about crops or taxes or add new trick of business, but all they found were people helping one another and keeping ledgers that measured favors instead of debts. A farmer from Ridge Hollow said he'd never seen a town run on trust before. Trust don't spend, he said. The boy smiled and replied, Don't need to. It circulates. Still, not every story stays quiet. Word of Dustwater's success reached far, carried by merchants and travelers who couldn't quite explain how a broke little town had turned itself into a haven of prosperity without a sill banker or baron in sight. Some thought it a miracle, others thought it foolish luck, but there were a few who thought it trouble. One of them was a man named Harper Vale, a silver-tongued trader from the city who smelled profit the way coyotes smell blood. He rode into town one spring afternoon, wagon full of fine goods and eyes full of calculation, wore a hat too clean and a smile too practiced. The folks of Dustwater greeted him polite but cautious. They'd learned by now that not all friendly hands meant to shake. The boy watched from the porch of the smithy. Harper set up shop in the square, selling trinkets and promises to anyone who'd listen. By sundown, half the town was curious and the other half uneasy. The next morning, Harper came to find the boy. You're the man they talk about, he said, voice smooth as butter on a hot pan. The one who built a town out of dust. The boy shrugged. Didn't build nothing. Just reminded folks. They could Harper smiled that smile that never reached his eyes. Well, I can help you make it bigger, better. You've got a good thing here, but you're thinking too small. You could open trade routes, build a bank, mint your own scrip. With a little organization, Dustwater could be the richest town west of the divide. The boy studied him a long moment. And who'd hold the key to that bank? Harper spread his hands. Why, We will would, of course. I'm just a man who knows how to move money. The boy's voice stayed calm. Money moved fine on its own. What it don't do well is sit still. The merchant's smile tightened. You're wasting opportunity, son. You've got something special here, and you're letting it rot under dust. The world don't wait for men who think slow. The boy looked past him, toward the fields shimmering under the noonday sun. Maybe that's why the world always thirsty, he said. It drinks too fast. That should have ended it, but Harper wasn't a man who gave up easy. Stayed in town buying small bits of land, whispering to folks who still remembered the hunger of the old days, promising safety, credit, comfort, progress, he called it. The boy didn't try to stop him at first. He knew there were lessons a man couldn't learn secondhand, but he kept watch. Watched the way Harper's silver words began to weigh on folks' hearts, the way old fears started to creep back into their eyes. By midsummer, Harper had built a fine office on the edge of town, complete with a painted sign that read Vale Mercantile and Trust. The word trust was what burned most. Folks started coming to him for loans again, saying it was just temporary, that they'd pay him back soon. They still traded favors, still helped one another, but the shadow of numbers was growing long again. The boy could feel it like cold air seeping under a door. One evening he found Harper sitting on his porch, cigar in hand, boots too clean for the dirt beneath them. You've done good, the merchant said. You gave him hope, I'll give him direction. The boy sat across from him. Quiet direction toward what growth, Harper said. You can't keep them feeding each other forever. Sooner or later, they'll want more. More comfort, more goods, more control. That way I come in, I'll give them the world they're dreaming of. The boy looked him square in the eye. And what do you take in return? Harper grinned wide and teeth flashing in the dark. Just what every man owes his banker, gratitude. They sat in silence a while, the fireflies flickering between them like coins of light. Finally, the boy spoke. You know, my teacher once told that they two kinds of builders, the kind that raise barns and the kind that raise debts. Guess we'll see which kind you are. Harper's smirk didn't fade. Guess we were weeks past, and the town began to divide. Some folks sided with Harper, saying the boy way was too simple for a world growing faster by the day. Others stayed loyal to the old path, work honest, trade fair, give back. The air thickened with quiet tension. The boy didn't fight with words, he just kept doing what he always did, helping, fixing, listening. But he knew storms when he smelled them, and this one wasn't of rain. It was greed, men back, dressed in finer clothes. One night, lightning cracked across the plains and thunder rolled through the valley like a warning. I mean, mind so low to yourself, we shot my tower, and then I didn't even know it. I know the time just go to real slow, and I did on the fast way, thunder rolled through the valley like a warning. The boy stood at the edge of town, staring out at the horizon. He could see Harper new warehouse gleaming in the distance, lanterns burning late. He knew what was coming. Power never forgets a place that proved it could live without it. The wind picked up, bringing the scent of rain and smoked hay. He whispered under his breath, and the first time patience had to fight for its ground, then he turned back toward the firelight of Dustwater Crossing, ready to face what came next. The storm hit by morning, thick and mean, the kind that turns roads into rivers and roofs into seas. Dustwater folks stayed inside, doors bolted, shutters tight, but the thunder felt closer than it should, like it wasn't just weather rumbling over the plains, but something buried deep, waking up. The boy didn't take shelter.
Stood out in the downpour, coat plastered to his shoulders, watching the rain hammer Harper find new warehouse at the edge of town. The thing stood tall and proud, white paint glistening, word trust curling in gold above the door. Every flash of lightning made it look less like a building and more like a tombstone. By midday, the creek was flooding. Muddy water tore through fences, dragged away barrels and scraps of lumber. The boy was helping folks shore up what they could when he saw it. One of Harper's wagons half sunk in the riverbank, crates spilling out. He ran towing it, boots vanishing into the muck, and pried one open. Not grain, not supplies, contracts, dozens of them, wrapped in oilskin, promissory notes, loan agreements, debts disguised as gifts. Every name in Dustwater was in there somewhere.
Every handshake Harper had offered had a knife hid behind it. The boy stood in the rain, breathing hard, papers fluttering in the wind like white birds trying to fly away. Then, without a word, he tossed the whole bundle into the flood. The river caught him quick, carrying the town chains downstream. He turned and saw Harper standing on the ridge, coat dark with rain, eyes narrow in veins. He realized what had happened. "You fool!" Harper shouted over the wind. "Those papers were worth more than this whole damn town. Axes!" The boy shouted back, voice steady against the storm. Then I reckon the town richer for losing them. Harper charged down the hill, mud splashing up to his knees. You don't understand.
You've ruined everything I built. A boy met him halfway. Rain pouring down between them. No, he said quietly. I saved what you didn't build. For a long moment, neither moved. Lightning cracked close enough to turn the sky white, thunder rolling through their bones. Then Harper laughed, a broken, bitter sound that cut through the rain. You think this'll last? Without contracts, without banks, without men that me keep in order, you'll fall apart. You can't run a world on trust. The boy expression didn't change. We already did. You just forgot how. Harper stared at him, breath ragged, rain streaming down his face. Then he turned, slow and trembling, and walked back toward town, muttering under his breath like a man arguing with ghosts. The boy watched till he vanished into the gay. The wind howled, the rain thickened, and the warehouse creaked loud under the strain.
By nightfall, it collapsed, the roof giving in with a groan that echoed like a confession. When the storm finally passed, Dustwater looked like it had been scrubbed clean. The streets glistened, the air smelled of new beginnings, and the creek, once muddy and wild, had found its calm again. The townsfolk came out, blinking into the light, seeing the wreckage where Harper Warehouse had stood. The boy said nothing, picked up a broken board and started rebuilding fences. The others followed. No one meant the papers, no one meant Harper. They just worked. By sunset, Dustwater was humming again, not with gold, but with gratitude. Days later, Harper left town. He didn't say goodbye. Folks said they saw him heading east, back toward the cities, where the lights never dim and the deals never stop. The boy watched him go from the ridge, hat low over his eyes. "A world taken back," he murmured. "It always does, but it won't take this place." It wide been months. Crops grew tall, rivers ran clear, and laughter lived easy. The boy became the quiet-hearted water, the one folks came to for advice, or for nothing at it but a listening ear. He never talked about the storm or the papers or the man who tried to buy their souls. He just kept fixing things, plow, roofs, hearts. And much to teach, just takes patience. She tilted her head. Patience. Don't plow fields, he said, but it keeps your hand steady on the reins. She stayed a few days learning how Dustwater worked, how folks traded chores instead of bills, how they kept ledgers not to collect, but to remember. On her last night, she found the boy sitting by the fire behind the smithy, staring at the flames like they were whispering secrets. "You rethink this'll last?" she asked. He didn't look up. "Nothing lasts," he said, "but then things ache." She nodded slow, understanding more than his words. "Then I'll make sure the ache carries." She left before sunrise, and Dustwater legend went with her east, west, through valleys and plains, carried by traders, preachers, drifters. It changed into telling. All good stories do, but the heart stayed the same. A town that chose trust over gold and found itself richer for it. Years later, when the boy hair had gone gay and the forge no longer sang bright, he took to sitting out at dusk, watching the sky turn gold to purple. Children played in the dirt where the old bank once stood, laughing with the kind of joy no coin could buy. He smiled, leaning back in his chair. "Guess patience paid out after out," he muttered. The wind picked up, rustling the fields, carrying the scent of rain. He closed his eyes and listened, just listened, to the quiet hum of a town that had learned to live slow. And for the first time in a long while, he felt rich. The seasons turned soft after that, each one rolling into the next without hurry, like the land itself had learned the rhythm of the boy heart. Dustwater didn't grow much bigger, but it grew deeper. The people, they knew one another by name, not by debt. When a fence needed fixing, 3 hands showed up for dawn. When a harvest ran late, half the town showed with baskets. There weren't no mayor, no sheriff, no banker, just a circle of voices, all equal by the same fire. In a world where most towns rose fast and fell faster, Dustwater endured because it never tried to outpace the sun. The boy, though he wasn't much of a boy anymore, became what the old man had once been to him, a teacher who didn't preach, just lived. He'd spend his days hammering at the forge or mending tools for neighbors, then sit outside come evening telling whoever asked about patience, fairness, and the kind of wealth that don't fit in a pocket. He didn't quote scripture or ledgers, told stories of mistakes and mercy, of losses that became lessons, and of one gray-haired stranger who taught him 3 simple rules. Folks would lean in, quiet days smoke, while the sun dipped and the world turned gold. One autumn, a young man named Wyatt came wandering into town. He looked hungry, not dead in the belly, but behind the eyes, had that same look the boy himself once carried, if the world had taken more than it gave, but he still wasn't ready to quit. He found work at the forge, learning the trade, and though his hands blistered and his back ached, he never complained. One night, after the last ember dimmed, he asked, "How'd you build all this? The town, the peace, the people?" The older man smiled, hand resting on the evel. "Didn't build it, grew it. You can hammer metal, you can carve stone, but you can't force people. You just plant patience in them and let it take root." Wyatt frowned. "Patience don't pay for nails." The man chuckled. "Maybe not, but it buys time, and time buys wisdom, and wisdom builds everything worth keeping." Over the next few years, Wyatt stayed, learning more than that how to shape iron. He learned when to stay his hand, when to wait for the right heat, and when to trust the cool. The old man saw himself in the boy, same restless fire, same hunger for meaning. One day, while mending a plow, he said, "You know, every man carries a forge inside him. Some burn too hot and melt their own iron. Others burn too cold and never make nothing. But if you learn to tend your fire steady, you can build a life strong enough to weather any storm." Wyatt nodded slow, taken in. "That's how you did it." The man smiled faintly. "That's how the land did it through me. Years drifted on like clouds over the plains. Dustwater children grew up knowing what their parents had forgotten, that value don't come from what you take, but from what you tend." Travelers still came through, asking how the town thrived without banks or masters, and they always left with the same answer: "We yet trust slow." Then, one winter, when frost bit deep and the air tasted like iron, the old man fell ill. He knew it wasn't the kind of sickness you shake off. The fire inside him had burned long and steady and clean, but even good coals fade. Wyatt sat by his bedside, feeding the stove, listening to the wind rattle the shutters. "You'll be fine," he said, trying to smile. The old man laughed. "Dry Gunlin, son. I've been fine longer than most men get to be. Ain't it nothing wrong with resting once the work done?" Wyatt looked down, jaw tight. "You always said the work never ends." "It don't," the man said softly. "Sometimes it changes hands." He reached out, his fingers rough and warm. "You remember the rules I told you? Earn slow, give often, leave early." The man nodded. "Good. The first keeps your feet on the ground. The second keeps your heart open. And the last keeps you from thinking you're bigger than time." The room went still, the fire whispering low. The man looked toward the window. White snow was falling, soft of feathers. "Funny thing, Wyatt. You spend your life chasing what you think you need, and one day you wake up surrounded by what you never knew you were building. This town, these people, they ain't mine. They're theirs. And that's what makes it perfect." Wyatt's voice cracked. "Don't talk like that." The old man smiled, and talking like nothing, just telling the truth. He took a slow breath, eyes drifting half shut. "You listen to me now. Someday, someone gonna come through. And lost, tired, looking for something worth believing in. You give them what I gave you. Don't lecture them. Just show them. Patience grows faster when it's planted in silence." The snow kept falling, covering the world in a hush. The man breathing slow, deep, and steady, like he was finally in step with the land again. Wyatt sat there till dawn, the fire burning low, the town quiet in prayer. When the first light broke, he knew the man was gone. They buried him under the hill that looked out over the fields, the safe place he used to sit watching sunsets. The whole town came, hats in hand, tears mixing with snow. Wyatt didn't say much. He just took a handful of dirt, let it fall over the vase, and whispered, "Guess the ground still got something to teach." After that day, Wyatt took over the forge. Folks started coming to him the same way they once came to the old man. And when they asked how to get rich, he'd smile that quiet, patient smile and say, "Depend what you mean by rich." And years rolled by, the town stayed what it always was, humble, generous, alive. When storms came, they rebuilt. When droughts hit, they shared. And every so often, travelers would stop to rest by the fire, hear the tale of the man who turned patience into gold, and walk away with a little more peace than they brought. On quiet nights, Wyatt would sit alone by the hill, watching the stars burn slow across the sky, and swear he could still hear the old man's voice ride in the wind. Take care of time, son. It's the only currency that never loses value. Spring came again to Dustwater Crossing, slow and deliberate as always. The frost broke early that year, and with it came a wind that smelled of sage and rain clean, honest, like the earth had been scrubbed of every unspoken sorrow. Wyatt rose before dawn each day, same as the old man used to, his hands blackened from forged soot, his heart steady at an anvil under heat. Didn't speak much anymore, but folks didn't need him to. The town spoke for itself. Every nail, every harvest, every meal shared was proof enough that patience still had a place in a world too eager to rush. Children played in the same square where a Harper Vale sign once hung, though few remember the name. They raced the wind, tossed pebbles into the creek, and grew up knowing that a man's worth wasn't measured by what he owned, but by how many hands he lifted with his own. Wyatt would sometimes watch them from his porch, the corner of his mouth twitching into the kind of smile you earn, not wear. He'd mutter to himself that the best dividend there is. Life went on like that for years steady, simple, sure. The seasons moved without argument, and Dustwater kept its rhythm. But one summer evening, a stranger came riding down the trail, the sun setting behind her with a crown of flame. She wasn't young, but there was a fierceness to her that made her seem unbreakable. Her clothes were city-cut, her boots polished, her eyes sharp with the kind of hunger that don't fade easy. When she reached the smithy, Wyatt was leaning against the door frame, wiping his hands with a rag. "You the one they call the keeper of Dustwater?" she asked, her voice firm but curious. Wyatt shrugged. "Town keeps itself. I just make sure the hinges don't squeak." She dismounted, dust billowing around her heels. "Named Clara Boone," she said. "My father used to talk about this place. Said there was a man head once who ruined him." Wyatt blinked, realization cutting through the haze of years. "Boone," he repeated, slow. "As in Travis Boone the banker," she nodded. "He died a bitter man. Spent his last years warning me about this town and the fool who taught it to live without debt. So I came to see it for myself." Wyatt folded his arms. "And what do you see?" Clara glanced around, at the fields swaying gold under the evening light, at the children laughing, at the townsfolk sharing supper on porches instead of counting coin. Her brow furrowed. "He shouldn't work," she said. "By every measure I know, this place should have dried up long gone." Wyatt smiled frankly. "Maybe your measures are crooked." She shot him a look, half insulted, half intrigued. "You don't believe in structure?" "Oh, I believe in it," he said. "Just not the kind that makes one man knees so another can stand taller." Clara tilted her head, studying him. "You sound like a philosopher." He chuckled. "No, I'm just an old blacksmith who got lucky enough to learn from a patient fool." That night she stayed at the inn and walked the town under moonlight, listening to the quiet hum of life that didn't depend on numbers. The next day she came back to the smithy, sleeves rolled up. "Teach me," she said simply. Wyatt raised a brow. "To hammer iron to build a town that don't break the way he did. Not with lectures, but with labor." He made her work the forge till her hands blistered, made her carry water till her back ached, made her wait through a whole day heat before shaping a sealed nail. When she asked why, he said, "Can't build anything steady with restless hands. You gotta learn the weight of stillness first." Weeks passed. Clara learned to move slower, to listen longer, to measure value not in minutes but in meaning. She helped in the fields, fixed fences, sat with widows, and mended shoes for children who didn't know who her father was. One evening after the day work was done, she sat beside Wyatt on the porch watching the sunset stain the sky. "I think I get it now," she said. "Wealth ain't what you have, it's what keeps growing when you stop looking at it." Wyatt nodded. "Took me near half my life to learn that truth. You got it quicker than most." She smiled. "Maybe 'cause I grew up surrounded by what it wasn't for a long time, neither spoke." The wind moved gentle through the grass, the smell of wildflowers mixing with coal dust. Finally, Clara said, You would think about leaving. You could take this way of living elsewhere, spread it further. Wyatt looked out across the fields, eyes soft. No need. The wind will carry it. Always does, and it did. Travelers came and went, taking pieces of Dustwater's story with them. How a place too small for greed grew rich with patience. How a man who'd once had nothing left behind, everything that mattered. Some called it myth, others gospel, but it kept moving, changing shape, teaching whoever had ears to listen. Years later, when Wyatt Beard had gone white and his steps slowed to the rhythm of old wood, he'd still tell the same story to any drifter who stopped by his forge. He'd end it the same way every time. Don't chase the gold, son. Chase the peace that comes when you don't need it. And when those words left his mouth, the fire would crackle like it understood, throwing sparks up into the night sky like a man counting blessings instead of debts. He'd lean back, close his eyes, and listen to the sound of hammer on iron, wind on grass, and the laughter of children growing up in a town that had learned what money never could buy. In none, in time when Wyatt was gone, folks buried him up on the same hill as the old man, side by side beneath a single oak tree. No stone marked the spot, just a wooden sign carved with 6 simple words. Earn it slow, give often, leave early. That's the outlights. Well, to be often church come before and only can find up your judge of someone that's through field be. Years rolled on like a river that forgot how to rush. Dustwater changed again, though never in ways that made noise. The town got older, wiser, a little quieter. The oak tree on the hill grew thick and wide, its roots drinking deep from the same soil that held the 2 men who'd started it. Folks still went up there sometimes, young couples looking for luck, old farmers looking for peace, wanderers looking for something they couldn't name. They'd stand under that oak, hat in hand, and swear they could feel the heartbeat of the land humming steady beneath their boots. Some said it was just wind moving through branches. Others said it was memory, still alive and whispering. Either way, it sounded the truth. Clara Boone stayed in Dustwater after Wyatt passed. She took over the forge for a while, but her hands were better suited for books and people than hammers, so she started keeping records, not ledgers of coin, but stories. Every deal, every kindness, every lesson learned the hard way found its place in a big leather journal she called the Ledger of Hands. She wrote in it every night, sitting by lantern light, her handwriting neat and patient. So we don't forget, she'd say whenever someone asked what she was writing for. Not the names, not the reasons. Years turned into decades. Children grew up and moved away, taking Dustwater, quiet wisdom with them, might seeds caught in their boots. Some into them in cities. We'd steal, scrape the sky, and folks measured worth in minutes instead of sunsets. But every so often, one of them would write back. The letters always said the same thing in different words. I tried what they taught me, and I got work. Clara would read each one by the fire, smile slow, and tuck it into the back of the Ledger of Hands. When the pages filled up, she started a new one, and another after that. The collection grew until one day a traveler from Far East, a scholar with glasses too fine for dust, stumbled upon her doorstep. He'd heard of Dustwater, of its strange way of living, and he came hoping to find the secret written down next scripture. Clara poured him coffee and handed him the books. He spent that day reading, turning each page like it might change his life. When the sun went down, he lit up, eyes wide with confusion. There's no system here, he said. No formula. Just stories. Clara smiled, eyes soft. And ain't that the only system that worked? He frowned. But how did you sustain it? No banks, no government, no hierarchy. How does that kind of order survive? Clara leaned back in her chair, letting the lantern light flicker over her lined face. Order need bosses, son. It just needs balance. We don't try to control the tide. We just make sure nobody's drowning. The scholar left the next day baffled but thoughtful. Months later, Clara received a letter from him saying he'd written a paper about Dustwater, calling it the sustainable paradox. He said no one believed it. Clara chuckled when she read that. Of course they don't, she said. Truth don't sell well when it don't promise power. By then, she was an old woman, hair silver, hands rocked by time, but still steady when she turned a page. Some nights she'd walk up to the hill, lean against the oak, and talk like the men beneath it were still listening. We did good, she'd whisper. World still turning, but slower in. Guess that all any of us wanted. Then came a summer when Dustwater faced its first drought in near 30 years. The fields cracked, the creek shrank to a trickle, and the wind carried more dust than rain. The town lived like they always had, voices low but sure. There was no panic, no shouting, no blaming. They just worked together, digging deeper wells, sharing what little they had, trusting that patience, like every seed, blooms when it's ready. Still, one night, Clara sat alone by the forge, staring at the coals and thinking about the past. She remembered Wyatt's steady hands, the old man's slow draw. The first time she understood that wealth wasn't meant to be hoarded. It was meant to move, quiet and kind, like water. The drought would pass, she knew, 'cause storms don't stay mad forever. The world that needed reminding that Dustwater had already learned how to wait. Weeks later, the rain came soft at first, then sure, pouring down until the earth drank its fill. Folks cheered, danced barefoot in the mud, lifted their faces to the sky like it was old friend finally home. Clara just smiled from her porch, whispering to, "Your time, didn't you?" Not long after she fell ill, old age had come calling, and for the first time in her life, she didn't fight it. The town doctor, a quiet man who owed her his education, came to sit by her bed. "You've got visitors," he said. And there they were, the children, the farmers, the widows, the wanderers, all the lives Dustwater had shaped, gathered around her one last time. Clara reached out, taking the hand of the youngest among them, a girl with dark curls and eyes like fresh-tilled soil. "What your name, sweetheart?" "Patience," the girl whispered. Clara laughed, soft and breathless. "Well, now," she said, "guess the town named itself proper after ours." She passed that night, peaceful rain on a tin roof. They buried her under the oak, beside the men who taught her what wealth truly was. And beneath the earth, free lives, one who'd learned, one who'd taught, and one who'd remembered, rested, perfect balance. Above them, the town carried on, not through riches or rules, but through rhythm, a rhythm of work, of giving, of trust. And every time the wind blew over those hills, it sounded that the words carved on that wooden sign were whispering E and earn slow, give often, leave early. The lesson hadn't died. It had simply grown quiet enough for the world to hear it again. Years drifted by, soft as ash over dying coals. Dustwater became a name passed along by word of mouth, the kind of place folks mentioned in whispers, half story, half sermon. Traders told of a valley where nobody starved, where deals were made with a handshake instead of a ledger, where no one had locked their doors. Some laughed it off as fairy talk, others packed their wagons and went looking. Most who searched never found it, for Dustwater had a way of hiding from those who sought it too hard. The town didn't want fame, nor visitors hungry for shortcuts. They waited for wanderers, not seekers. They're a difference, and the land knows it. By the time new settlers began whispering of its legend again, the old road to Dustwater had near vanished, swallowed by grass and time. The oak on the hill grew monstrous and beautiful, branches spread wide like a watchful sky. Beneath that, the graves of the three were rocked only by that weather-eater plank, the words now worn shallow by wind and rain. Still the message lingered, carved not yet in wood, but in memory. One autumn, a man named Eli stumbled into the valley. He was young, but looked twice his age, eyes hollow from city lights, voice frayed from talking too much and meaning too little. He'd come from the coast, where the streets glimmered like gold, but every heart felt rusted. He'd made his fortune trodden on things he couldn't touch, numbers, promises, breaths between choices. When that it came crashing down, he'd left with what little he could carry, a silver watch, a notebook, and a hunger he couldn't name. The watch stopped ticking halfway down the trail, and he took it to his side. He reached Dustwater by accident, or maybe not. The first thing he saw was smoke curling up from a chimney, lazy Z'd a thought. The second was a sign above a small wooden house, the forge. Inside, a young woman was working iron, the ring of metal sharp but sure. She lit up when he stepped through the doorway. "Help you?" she asked, wiping her hands on a rag. Eli hesitated. "I'm not sure." She studied him a moment, then nodded. "Then you're in the right place." Her name was Patience. She'd grown tall and strong, the image of the woman who'd been named for her. The forge had been hers since she was old enough to lift a hammer, and she worked it with a kind of grace that came from never rushing. Eli watched her shape a horseshoe with slow, rhythmic strikes. "You don't hurry much, do you?" he asked. "Why would I?" she said. "Fire don't care about your schedule. It only listens when you listen first." He smiled at that, though it hurt his face to do it. "I used to think faster meant smarter. Patience chuckled. Then you must have been rich. Eli's smile faded. Once, she said nothing, just kept hammering. After a while, he sat on the stepstad watching the sun fall over the valley. It was quiet in a way he hadn't heard before, like silence that had earned its place. He stayed there long after the fire died down, and when Patience lacked up for the night, she said, "They're an inn down the road. Tell 'em I sent you. They'll feed you and find you a bed." He did, her told. The innkeeper didn't ask questions. It handed him stew and a blanket. For the first time in years, Eli slept without dreaming of numbers falling. The next morning, he walked back to the forge. Patience was already working, hair tied back, sweat glinting under the early light. "I want to learn," he said. He raised an eyebrow. "Learn what?" He looked round William. "Half of the third one that built the gold to go out. Hey, but real look at all what this is." Patience handed him a hammer. Then started carrying water for weeks. He did nothing but haul buckets, clean tools, stoke fires. No talk of gold, no talk of markets, only sweat, dirt, and the smell of work. His hands blistered and bled, and then hardened. He learned to swing careful, to strike true. Each evening they'd sit by the door watching the sunset, not saying much. Sometimes Patience would tell him about the people who came before. Free souls who'd built a town by trust and left behind more wealth than any mind could hold. "They're buried up there," she said once, nodding toward the hill. "Go listen sometime. The wind will tell you what they taught." One night, Eli climbed that hill. The oak loomed tall, its bark rippled like old hands. The sign beneath it was faded near to nothing, but the words were still there. If you squinted, earn slow, give often, leave early. He traced them with his fingers, thinking how strange it was that all the charts and contracts he'd trusted couldn't match the weight of 6 simple words. He sat there to dawn, watching the first light crawl over the fields, and when it hit the graves, it felt like the land exhaled. When he came back down, something in him had changed. He stopped talking like a man who knew everything and started listening like one who didn't. He worked the forge steady, learned the rhythm of iron and patience. In time, he bought a small plot near the creek and built a cabin. Folks started coming to him for advice, not the kind you read in ledgers, but the kind that lives between silences. They'd ask how to make their farms last, how to settle disputes, how to teach their kids about worth. He never gave straight answers, just told them stories, that what Patience had done, that what everyone who lived in dust water learned to do. Years passed. One day a young trader from the city came riding through, suit pressed, boots shined, eyes sharp beat a blade. He'd heard the same rumor the scholar once had, that there was a place where money didn't rule, where people lived rich without riches. Found Eli working at the forge. Tell me, he said, "How do you make profit?" Eli looked up from his anvil, sweat rolling down his neck. "We don't," he said. "We meet naked, 3 in the fog only, and we're short wonder. We people involved to the forge that say, Eli, for the grace, Eli looked up from his anvil, sweat rolling down his neck. "We don't," he said. "We make her first word in the neighbor." Eli looked up from his phone and said, "Go like down his neck. We don't," he said. "We make her for the hillside. For sure, you can about." Eli smiled slow, only to find you kept shit. At night, when the tree is lit, he looked confused, maybe even angry. Eli didn't mind. It was that man who's fast, loud, blind, and right off into the dust rising behind him made smoke from a burning tree. Then he turned back to the forge. The steady heartbeat of dust water still coming through the ground beneath his boots. And somewhere beyond that hill, the wind whispered like an old friend, "You're tending the fire dead fine, son." Eli stayed in Dustwater for the rest of his days, though he never claimed to belong to it. Town don't belong to no man. He'd say it belongs to the hours that built it. Him spent most of those hours working the forge or teaching young ones how to listen to the world before trying to shape it. Folks took to calling him the Quiet Smith, though quiet didn't mean silent. He spoke when words mattered and held his tongue when they didn't, which, by Dustwater reckoning, made him one of the wisest men alive. Patience grew older, too, her hair silvering under the same sun that once lit her mother's smile. "I shall have answers," that's it, mother. She still worked the anvil from time to time, but mostly she walked the fields now, tending to the soil, teaching children how to plant slow every seed a promise. She'd say, crouching low with her hands in the dirt, and promises don't care for hurry. The kids would giggle and repeat it, not knowing they were reciting scripture. Dustwater had no church, but it didn't need one. The land itself preached enough sermons to fill a lifetime. One day Eli was sitting under the oak,
watching the clouds drift like lazy cattle when a boy ran up the hill panting. "Mr. Eli, Miss Patience, says the creek running low again." Eli nodded slow, standing up. "Then I reckon we better listen to what it's saying. The drought wasn't bad dead, but it was a whisper of what could come."
The town there, as always did, men, women, children, all circled in the square, faces turned toward one another instead of the sky. "Do we ration?" Someone asked. "Dig deeper." Eli rubbed his jaw. "Maybe both. But before we dig, let's think on why the earth might be holding back." Patience stepped forward, her voice soft but sure. "We've been planting too much wheat," she said. Land tired. It telling us to rest it. There was a murmur at that wheat. Was what fed half the town, but no one argued. They'd learned by now that patience ain't just about waiting, it's about listening. So they rotated crops, left certain fields fallow, took less so the soil could give more. Weeks passed and months, and though the creek stayed shallow, no one went hungry. And when the rain came back, it came gentle, respectful, like it knew it was welcome. That season, Dustwater learned another truth, that sometimes prosperity means knowing when not to pull from the earth. They wrote it down in the ledger of hands, right under a line about trust before trade, and so another principle was born, not from law, but from living. Years later, a small group of travelers rode in from the east. They were scholars mostly, one with spectacles so thick he looked perpetually astonished. Said they'd come to study the economy of patience. They carried notebooks, cameras, instruments none of the townsfolk understood. They asked questions, too many, too fast, and Eli answered them the same way. "Stay a spell, you'll see." They did stay. A whole summer watching how Dustwater moved without rush or greed. They studied how trade worked when nobody measured it, how disputes settled without coin, how people managed to prosper when no one kept score. The scholars couldn't make sense of it. "It breaks every rule we've written," one muttered. Eli grinned. "Maybe your rules were built for broken men." When they left, one of them stayed behind, a young woman named June. She said she couldn't go back to a world that mistook movement for progress. She asked to apprentice at the forge, and Eli agreed. Over time, she became much a part of Dustwater deep oak itself. Her hands learned the rhythm of patience, and her heart softened into silence. She began writing her own thoughts in a small notebook, a kind of continuation to the ledger of hands. In it, she wrote, "Patience is not the absence of ambition, it ambition with its boots off, listening to the wind." Eli read those words once, and tears welled behind his eyes. "That it," he said, "that the thing I've been hammering at my whole life." Time went on, it tends to do. The valley filled with new faces, new stories, but the soul of Dustwater stayed steady. Some bought tools, others bought tales, a few bought nothing but open hands, and those hands always found something to hold. They built new homes with old wood, patched roofs with laughter, and kept their ledgers not in books but in memory. When a man barn burned down, 10 others showed up before sunrise to raise a new one. When a widow ran short on grain, her sacks filled overnight. Nobody asked who gave what. They just trusted that when their own turn came, the same would happen. That was the balance. Eli grew gay, slower in his step, but never in his mind. He took to sitting by the forge with his coffee at dawn, watching June work the anvil. "You strike too soft," he'd say. She'd smile. "Or maybe you just struck too hard," he'd laugh. At that deep from the belly. Guess that the beauty of it. World don't need to be anyway. One winter the snow came early and heavy. Eli fell sick. The fever took him quick, and by the time the first thaw came, he was gone. The town buried him next to the others beneath the oak, carving his name small, the heat asked. No sermon, no eulogy, just a long silence that meant everything. June placed his old hammer at the foot of his grave and whispered, "Fire's still burning, teacher." Dustwater kept going, got that it always had. The forge stayed lit, the field stayed green, and the lessons lived in every trade and kindness. And when strangers still came wandering through, asking the same questions men had asked for 100 years, the people would smile and say, "You can't write down patience, you just have to wait with it." They'd point and toward the hill, and if those strangers listened long enough, they'd hear the wind through the oak soft and steady, like a breath between generations, carrying 6 words that had built a fortune no bank could count. Earn slow, give often, leave early. And somewhere in that sound, under the weight of time and trust, Dustwater still whispered back, "We did." Spring returned once more to Dustwater, but by then, time had smoothed the edges of things. What had once been stories told by firelight were now traditions passed without words. Children grew up learning that you help for your act, that a full table ain't full unless every chair taken, and that the worth of a man could be found in the silence he left behind, not the noise he made while living. The oak on the hill had grown so wide its roots cracked the stone beneath, like it was reaching deeper into the bones of the world. Some said it was the oldest tree for 100 miles. Others swore it still grew faster whenever the rain came soft. Nobody argued. Dustwater wasn't the kind of place that needed to prove itself. June became the quiet keeper of the ford. She didn't call herself a blacksmith, said the name was too heavy for what she did. Listen to the fire and tell it what it already knows. She'd say tapping at the metal with a rhythm that made the whole town feel steady. Under her care, the forge became a gathering place again. Part workshop, part confessional, part school. Strangers drifted in, stayed for a while and left a little lighter. Some left tools behind, others left words. June kept a shelf for both. One summer evening, she sat outside with a young boy named Lyle. He was small, sharp-eyed, and curious as a crow. His folks had moved to Dustwater from the city after losing near everything in a market crash. They'd come broke but not beaten, hoping to find a way to start over without the noise. The boy asked her, "Miss June, what makes this town work? Why young folks fight or cheat or leave when things get hard?" June thought for a long moment before answering. Because they learned that hurrying and hoarding don't grow roots. Patience does, trust does. And when something rooted deep enough storms us prune it, and they don't kill it. The boy nodded, squinting up at the oak on the hill. "So it all about trees then?" June laughed, the sound of wind through grass. "Yeah," she said, "it all about trees." Years later, that same boy grew into a man, and his name carried the quiet weight of those who came before. He took to keeping records that Clara once did, though his ink was different. He carved instead of wrote. Stories etched into wood panels, each one a piece of Dustwater soul. He'd hang them in the meeting hall, and travelers would stop there to run their fingers over the grooves, feeling the story instead of reading it. The panels told of the old man and his 3 rules, of the boy who saved the town by throwing its debts to the river, of the banker daughter who stayed to learn, and of the smiths who turned patience into prosperity. Over time, it became known as the Timber Ledger. One day, a man from a faraway university rode in, gay suit dusty, hands soft but curious. He introduced himself as Professor Halbrook, said he'd come to document the socio-economic miracle of Dustwater. Lyle chuckled when he heard that. Miracle, a fine word for what happens when folks finally stop wanting more than they need. The professor frowned. But surely someone must be in charge. Because him hired a bullet there like in the
and I'll to all answer to the while the not just split because we're ways from one with the between both. Yep, that's you didn't all the same thing. She don't say much, but she don't meet everything. Just had doesn't understand. But really, the state of which folks no city, even folks drawing charts that made no sense to anyone but him. Before leaving, he stopped by the fort to see June build a society without competition, without ownership, without ambition. We know it. He said, "It's fascinating. It can't last."
Humans aren't wired for it. June looked up from her work, eyes calm. Maybe you'd been wired too long to hear your own hum. The professor left puzzled, but he sent a letter months later saying Dustwater changed him, that he'd quit his post and moved to a small farm by the river. "I thought I'd study peace," he wrote, "but I reckon I wanted to live it." Years went on, and the town stayed true. There were hard winters, long summers, and the occasional loss that weighed heavy, but no storm could strip away what had been built slow. The ledger grew thicker, now carved in wood, ink, and memory. Children learned to read not just with their eyes, but with their hands, chasing the words their grandparents had once spoken by firelight. And whenever someone asked how Dustwater managed to keep its heart steady in a world that never stopped running, they'd nod toward the hill and say, "We still listen." One night, a great storm rolled across the plains, the kind that makes the sky split open and the earth remember it alive. Wind howled, rain hammered, lightning turned night into momentary day. When it passed, the town was safe, but the oak had split down its middle. Half still stood, half lay toppled, roots torn from the ground like veins from flesh. Folks there that dawned, silent, mourning like they'd lost kin. June walked up slow, hand resting on the bark. She'd done her work, he said softly. Gave shade, gave roots, gave shelter. Now you're just feeding the next. No one spoke for a long while. Then the boy Lyle's son, now grown himself, picked up an acorn from the ground, small and whole. He held it up to the light. Then I guess it's our turn. They planted it that same morning right beside the old stump. Rain came gentle the next week, and the seed took. Within months, a sprout appeared, tiny, fragile, but certain, and in that small green whisper, Dustwater heard its own voice again. The world beyond kept changing. Cities got louder, machines got smarter, fortunes rose and fell, but the valley didn't chase any of it. It just kept breathing. And if you were to walk there today, you'd find the new oak standing tall beside the old stump, both framed by fields that shimmer gold at sunset. Beneath them lies the heartbeat of 100 years of patience, still humming, still teaching. And when the wind blows through its branches, you can still hear the same words that built the town: soft prayer, steady ved time, earn slow, give often, leave early. The new oak grew faster than anyone expected. It was as if the land itself had been waiting for it, saving up years of quiet breath just to feed its roots. Every spring its leaves came in thick and full, and every autumn they fell soft as gold coins over the graves below. The stump of the old tree never rotted either. It stayed firm, gay, and split, but strong, like it refused to die because the memory it held still had work to do. Folks would sometimes sit between the two, old and new, and swear they could feel something humming between them, a kind of bridge between what was and what would be. Guswater had become more than a town by then. It was a rhythm, a way of moving through the world that didn't fit in books or maps. Travelers still came uncurious and lost, most broken in small ways they didn't yet understand. And every one of them left pained not by words, but by the slowness of getting. The people didn't preach, they didn't sell, hell, half the time they didn't even answer questions. They showed how to live gentle in a world that had forgotten how. One traveler, a young man named Cooper, came through one spring looking for work. Said he'd been a broker in the city before the market turned mean. He'd lost everything but the guilt, thought I could make people rich. He said one night by the fire, turns out I'd made him scared. June smiled over her coffee. That what money does when it runs faster than the heart. He frowned at that. So what do you trade? He time. She said it. The old currency that buys peace. He stayed longer than most. Helping to forge, fix fences, learned how to mend instead of replace. The first few months near drove him mad. How do you stand the quiet, he asked once, after a whole day with nothing but birds and wind for company. June smiled, eyes wrinkling like parchment. Ain't quiet, she said. You're just loud. He laughed, but he didn't argue. The next morning he woke before dawn and walked out into the fields. The fog was thick, the kind that makes the world feel small enough to hold. He listened. The soft rustle of wheat, the drip of dew, the breath of the earth, and for the first time in years he didn't feel alone. He didn't feel rich either, but he felt right. Cooper started helping June with the ledger of hands, though by now it wasn't a single book anymore. It had become a collection of journals, carvings, spoken tales, all tied together by one unbroken thread of patience. He began writing the lessons in his own words, trying to give shape to what Dustwater had taught him. But every time he tried to explain it, it slipped away. One night, he sighed and said, "It like trying to catch smoke." June chuckled. Maybe smoke don't need catching. Maybe it just needs seeing, so he stopped writing explanations and started collecting moments instead. You fick en back of your sense lang död, like one truth be nothing. Fair again, I know that's too blind to joke. How did not just friend of God, oh, and we're bums, son, coming to read, yeah, opinion, low to each other, your torch there. This on the way I get back, and it's yeah, and when he felt his time drawing near, he sat under the oak, looking out over the valley. The sun was setting behind the ridge, turning the world to fire. June sat beside him, still strong, her hands folded on her lap. You reckon it then ends? He asked. She smiled faintly. Not while the wind remembers. They sat like that till the stars came out, and when the night finally grew cold, Cooper closed his eyes with a peace no coin could have bought. They buried him on the hill the next morning, beside the others, a line of quiet lives written in earth instead of ink. June placed her hand on the ground and whispered, "Rest easy. You earned slow after that." The forge went dark for a time. June spent her days walking the valley, tending to what needed tending. Folks thought maybe the town had seen its last chapter. But one night, a child, a girl with hair like wheat and eyes like sunrise, wandered into the forge and lit the fire again. She worked clumsy, but the rhythm came to her quick. When June found her the next morning, she didn't scold her, just watched. The girl looked up and said, "The fire was lonely?" June smiled, a tear catching in the corner of her eye. "Then I reckon you were called." The girl stayed, learned, listened, and so the forge sang again, the same song it always had, slow, steady, sure. Dustwater breathed new life once more. Its heartbeat passed from calloused hands to small, eager ones. Years would pass, and the child would grow into her own teacher, her own patient. And someday, long after June and Ann who'd come before had joined the soil, another traveler would walk into that same valley and ask the same old question. How does this town keep living when the rest of the world keeps rushing? And someone, maybe that little girl, grown tall, would smile and answer, same aim always. We would never stop earning slow. And when night fell, when the crickets started their low hymn and the fire crackled at memory, the valley would whisper in under the wide, star-fed sky. Earn slow, give often, leave early. And it would be well. The years that followed were gentler than most. Dustwater had settled into itself like a river that finally found its bed. The world beyond still roared with engines, machines, and voices that believed loud men alive. But the valley never answered back. This rhythm was older than ambition, and it didn't care much for noise. The people there still rose with the sun and slept with the stars, still shared what they grew, still mended before replanting, still paused long enough to listen to the way silence filled the cracks between words. That silence was what made the town rich. Not the kind of rich you count, but the kind that counts you. The little girl who'd relit the forge, her name was Wren, grew up under June's patient eye. She had quick hands, quicker thoughts, and a heart that learned the value of waiting even when her youth told her to hurry. The fire listens to those who listen first, June would remind her. Same words the old man once told the first boy who learned the trade. And every time Wren struck the anvil, she'd feel something in the sound like the Edelball who came before her. She was 14 the day June took her up the hill. The oak had grown vast again by then, branches stretching wide to a cathedral roof. June walked slow, a cane in her hand but a smile still on her lips. When they reached the top, Wren saw the line of graves, simple, clean, no stones, just names carved into the wood and a hum in the wind that sounded almost of voices praying low. These are the ones who built this place, June said, but they didn't build it out of wood or stone. They built it out of patience. Wren knelt in the grass, fingers brushing the carvings. They were all smiths. June shook her head. No, child. Some were farmers, some were teachers. Some knew how to sit quiet with a man when he was hurting. That a kind of forge, too. They stayed there till the sun slipped low, painting the world in amber. June's eyes went distant, soft with memory. There's something I've been meaning to tell you, she said. I'm going away soon. Wren's head shot up away. Well, June smiled faintly, where everyone who done their work goes. Don't fret none. You'll keep the fire burning. When someone comes asking how we did it, you'll tell them the truth. What truth? June's hand rested on her shoulder. That wealth ain't made, it remembered. That night, June passed in her sleep, peaceful late twilight. The next morning, Wren found her sitting up right by the window, the dawn spilling gold across her face like a blessing. She buried her under the oak with the others, her hammer laid beside her. For 3 days, the forge stayed quiet, not out of grief, but reverent. On the 4th day, Wren lit it in. Get this she had when she was a child. The fire flared, caught, settled into its steady song. You ain't gone, she whispered. You're just working on the other side. Years moved on, and Wren grew into the kind of woman the land trusted. She rebuilt the forge, but she also built something new, a cool, though she never held it that. It was just a big barn with long tables, shelves of tools, and walls open to the wind. She taught whoever wanted to learn, blacksmithing, carpentry, how to keep soil alive, how to listen to storms instead of fearing them. But more than that, she taught the creed that had shaped the valley. Earn slow. Give often. Leave early. She said it at the start of every lesson and again at the end. The children recited it like a hymn, but they didn't say it with their mouths alone. They lived it. Sometimes wanderers would still find their way to Dustwater. A few came searching for the secret formula, the magic blueprint for peace. Others came because they'd heard a whisper, stories about a place that still believed in kindness without condition. Wren welcomed them on, though she never gave them what they thought they wanted, and a map you can fodder, she'd say, only a rhythm you can match. Some stayed long enough to learn that rhythm, others left frustrated, calling the town naive. Wren never argued, Patience didn't argue, it waited. One autumn, that old man came riding through, beard wild, eyes tired but alive. They said his name was Caleb, a historian who'd spent his life trying to prove Dustwater was just a myth. But hell, I am, he said, looking around at the quiet streets and the glow of the forge. You're real, Ben smiled. Reckon we always were, he stayed. A few days listening to stories, walking the valley, sitting beneath the oak. On his last night, he asked what the secret really. How do you make it work when the rest of the world keeps falling apart? Wren looked into the fire. We stopped calling survival a competition. He wrote those words down, and though he didn't say it, she could tell they struck something deep in him. When he rode away at dawn, she knew he'd carry the story further. But the funny thing about Dustwater was, the farther its story went, the less it needed explaining. The truth of it wasn't in the telling. It was in the living decades later, when Brent herself was gray. She'd sit by the forge and watch the young ones work. They were faster than she was, but their hands were sure. One day, a girl asked her, Miss Wren, when did Dustwater start? Wren chuckled, eyes bright with mischief. It didn't. It just kept going, and when she passed, they buried her beneath the oak too, right beside June and the ones before. The hill grew crowded, but the land never minded. Each gate was a note in the same song, and the valley kept singing. The forge still burned, the creek still whispered, the children still laughed. And when the wind swept through at dusk, it carried that old familiar promise, steady, timeless, sure, earn slow, give often, leave early. The world never stopped rushing, but Dustwater never forgot how to wait, and that was enough. By the time another century came and went, Dustwater had become less a place and more a whisper. Maps didn't mark it anymore, and travelers who claimed they'd seen it were often laughed off by folks in the cities. They said there was no valley like that left. That land, like Dustwater, had been bought, sold, or burned long ago. But every so often, someone would return from a long journey, quiet-eyed and chained, and when asked what they'd found, they'd just say, peace that didn't need proving. The old ones would nod and smile, knowing they'd found the valley. The oak on the hill was enormous, now wide enough that 20 men could stand hand to hand around it and still not touch fingers. The stump beside it had finally begun to fade, turning soft and moss-covered, returning itself to the soil. Some said the old tree hadn't died. It had laid down to feed its kin. The new oak stood guard over the graves, its leaves whispering in voices that felt older than the wind. The sign was still there too, carved deeper by each generation that passed. The letters kept fresh by calloused hands and reverent hearts. Earn slow, give often, leave early. Every year on the first rain of spring, the townsfolk would gather there, bringing bread, flowers, and bits of what they'd made that year. A plow blade, a woven blanket, a hand-carved spoon. They'd place them under the oak and say nothing, just listen. It wasn't a ritual of prayer so much as a conversation with time. They knew the dead didn't need words, they needed continuance. School had turned into a kind of living library by then, not the kind filled with books and shelves, but with people. Craftsmen, farmers, healers, thinkers, all of them teaching each other. If you wanted to learn about trade, you went to the weavers. If you wanted to learn patience, you went to the blacksmiths. If you wanted to learn silence, you went to the river. Nobody paid for lessons. They paid with attention. And no fee worth more than your listening, one teacher used to say. It was not that Dustwater had no ambition, it just had a different kind. The people wanted to make things that lasted longer than they did. A chair that could hold 5 generations, a story that could hold 10. They didn't build fast or wide, but deep, and that kind of building don't crumble easy. The outside world, meanwhile, kept rushing faster, taller, louder. Empires rose, burned, rebuilt. Money keying shape from gold to paper to numbers. But Dustwater never changed its coin. It still traded in trust and time and care. One day, a small caravan rolled into the valley, 6 people, dressed in strange fabrics that shimmered by the city lights. They said they'd come from far away, from a world where nothing was real unless it was recorded. They carried small machines that hummed when pointed at something, claiming they could capture a place forever. The townsfolk welcomed them, offered food and rest, but the visitors didn't eat much. They were too busy trying to measure Dustwater. We can take you known in, one of them said, holding up a device that glowed blue. People across the world could see what you've built. See, Tessa. The elders listened kindly, then shook their heads. Dustwater ain't meant to be seen, said one. It meant to be felt. The travelers didn't understand. They left confused, frustrated that their machines couldn't capture the thing that made the valley what it was. The next week, a letter arrived from one of them addressed to the forge. It read, "Your town doesn't exist on any network, but I can't stop dreaming of it. Every time I close my eyes, I hear a hammer hitting iron." The letter was pinned up on the forge wall right beside 100 others from souls who'd come, learned it, and gone. They were the same in one way. They spoke of finding stillness, and that stillness was worth more than all the noise they'd left behind. The forge keeper was a man named Tobias, by then broad-shouldered, slow-tongued, and gentle as rain. He wasn't born in Dustwater, but it had claimed him of the same. He was teaching a group of children one afternoon when a storm rolled in sudden and hard. Thunder cracked close, and the kids flinched. Tobias just smiled. "That ain't anger," he said. "That's the sky remembering how to speak." When the storm passed, he led them outside to see the world glistening, water dripping from every branch, the air thick with the smell of new earth. "That," he said softly, "is patience rewarding herself." Over the next few decades, the valley saw a new kind of visitor pilgrims. Folks from far-off lands where the idea of Dustwater had become legend. They didn't come for riches or salvation. They came to slow down. Some stayed a week, others a lifetime. The valley didn't judge it, then took whoever came and gave them what they were ready to learn. A few built seeds of their own, new ways of tending the soil, songs from other languages, crafts Dustwater had never seen. The town grew richer, not wider, its knowledge folding over itself at layers of time. Yet still the oak watched. Its branches stretched so far they shaded the graves even at noon, and its roots tangled deep with those who'd once taught the world to breathe. When the wind blew through, it sounded at voices laughing, low and steady, and if you stood there long enough, eyes closed, you could swear they were whispering straight to your soul. You ain't rich till your heart quiet. The town never wrote that one down. They didn't have to. Every soul who lived there carried it in their chest like a second heartbeat. Winter came to Dustwater softer than it used to. The snow didn't fall in hard, and when it did, it laid quiet, like it knew the town beneath didn't need testing anymore. The wind still sang, but now it carried a warmth to its edge, a hum of memory rather than warning. The forge still burned, though its hammer rang less these days. Tobias had grown gay, and his students had learned the rhythm well enough that he longer needed to strike dead often. Missy Artemedian and you slightly missed our hand for unbending. That was the Lord be ready today, Missy. Leasley watched now, sitting by the handle with a mug of tea, eyes half lit in the sparks, jumped and danced with fireflies in the dim light. Every so often, a traveler would wander in from the high ridges, face wind-bitten, eyes hollow with too much want. Tobias always offered the same thing, first a seat, then silence. They'd sit together for a spell, saying nothing until the traveler finally broke and asked what everyone asked in their own way. How'd this place last when nothing else did? Tobias would nod toward the hill. Because we stopped thinking last, it meant standing still. The traveler would frown, not understanding, but Tobias never explained. Dustwater wasn't for explaining, it was for remembering. He had a boy helping him then, a tall, quiet thing named Eliar. The boy had been found at the valley edge years age, wandering alone, too young to remember where he came from. Tobias took him in, same way the forge once took him. Under that same roof of smoke and orange light, Eliar learned the shape of patience. He didn't ask many questions, he just watched and listened. And that, Tobias often thought, was the sure sign of someone who truly belonged to Dustwater someday. One cold morning when frost covered every window and the breath of the world hung still, Tobias led Eliar up to the oak. The boy had been there before, but never this early, never in winter silence. The old man stood beneath the branches, his coat heavy with years, his eyes far off. "You know what this tree is?" he asked. Eliar hesitated. "The beginning?" Tobias smiled. "Maybe. Or if what the beginning turns into when it learns not to hurry." He knelt, brushing the snow off the wooden sign. The letters had worn shallow again, but he traced them slow with one gloved finger. "This," he said, "aimed at a rule, yet a reminder, yet how the world keeps itself from falling apart." Eliar studied the words, "Earn slow, give often, leave early." Tobias nodded. "That the whole of it? Everything else is just decoration." They stood there for a while, neither speaking until the sun broke through the frost and turned the snow to glass. Tobias sighed, the sound deep and content. "Someday," he said, "you'll come up here alone, and when you do, you'll understand what I can't tell you yet." It wasn't long after that Tobias took sick. His hands trembled too much for the hammer, and his voice grew quiet, thinned in smoke. The forge dimmed for a spell, but never went cold. Eliar kept it alive, feeding it with care instead of fear. When Tobias finally passed, it was in the same chair where he taught 100 lessons, a faint smile on his lips, the sound of the bellows breathing soft nearby. The townsfolk buried him under the oak beside the others, leaving space for more, because Dustwater knew there was always room for more patience in the earth. Elior took over the forge. He didn't call himself master, or keeper, or teacher. When asked what he was, he'd just say, another listener. His first act was to rebuild the old bellows, patching them with stitched leather and oak from the fallen half of the original tree. The past should breathe through the present, he told the children who helped. That's how you keep it alive. The next spring, the valley bloomed more vivid than any field would call. Flowers carpeted the hills, bees moved lazy through the air, and the creek sang louder than it had in years. A lyre began carving again wooden tokens shaped like leaves, each one etched with a word from the ledger of hands. He'd hand them out to strangers, telling them to take aim one. You don't need the whole story, he'd say, just the piece that speaks. One woman chose trust, a farmer chose stillness, a child chose wait, and somehow each word found its way where he needed to go. By then, word of Dustwater had reached places that didn't believe in slow. A company from the city sent men down the trail one summer, surveyors and planners with steel carts and long papers full of lines. They said the valley was perfect for expansion, that it could serve the greater good if it were developed. Elior met them at the edge of town, arms crossed, eyes calm. You're welcome to rest, he said, but you can't buy a rhythm. The men laughed. Not understanding, they left the next morning, muttering about wasted potential. But months later, one of them came back alone, said he hadn't been able to sleep since he left, that the sound of Dustwater wind haunted him in a way that felt like mercy. He asked if he could stay. Eliar nodded patience. Take self kind, he said. Years flowed soft. The forge never died. The oak never stopped growing. And the town, if you can still call it that, remained what it had always been. A quiet heartbeat in a world that forgotten how to listen. No one kept ledgers anymore. They didn't need to. The lessons were alive in every wall, every field, every shared meal. Sometimes, on cool evening when the sun slipped behind the ridge, Eliar would walk up the hill and sit under the oak, eyes closed, breath slow. The wind would roll through the branches like a hymn-ebb, and somewhere in that hush he could still hear them all. The old man, the boy, the banker daughter, the smith, the wanderers, the patient souls who'd planted something bigger than themselves. And the stars came out, soft and unhurried. The earth itself seemed to murmur the same truth it had whispered. The generations earn slow, give often, leave early. The words no longer belonged to anyone. They belonged to time. There came a day when the valley looked different, though it hadn't changed at all. The grass was the same soft green. The creek sang the same song. The forge still breathed slow and steady. But there was a stillness heavier than silence, the kind that feels that the land itself is holding its breath. Elior stood by the oak, leaning on his staff, hair turned white in frost, eyes watching the horizon. He'd lived long enough to see whole generations rise and pass beneath these hills. The faces had changed, but the rhythm hadn't. Dustwater never forgot its own pulse. Still, he knew the time was coming when his fire would burn low. He'd seen the same calm settle in the eyes of those who'd gone before him, the peace of someone who knows they've spent their days well. Spends his last years much of youth in what you must have. You just say it last. So selling it like a blow and you have the sort so they be made to it. They tell me the cow had it on the level I have it. One spring, the young girl started coming by the forge. Her name was Sal. She was wild and curious, a bit too quick for her own good, but her heart was steady. And Liar saw something in her that reminded him of her, bright and stubborn, but willing to listen once she'd worn her energy thin. She watched him work for weeks before asking if she could try. You can, he said, but only if you promise to learn slow. She frowned. In the Teta way of saying learn late, Liar chuckled. Maybe. But late done right still beats early done wrong. He handed her the hammer, guided her hands, and watched as she struck the anvil too hard the first time. The sound rang sharp, unbalanced. That's the sound of hurry, he said. You'll know patience when it sings back to you. So she practiced every day for months until the strikes grew even, the rhythm sure. The forge began to sound like music yet. Eliar smiled each time, knowing the fire was in good hands. "You listen better than you think," he told her one afternoon. The sun poured through the open window. She grinned. "I listen to you talk Gek thunderslow, but hard to ignore." He laughed loud and easy, the sound rolling through the valley. It was the last laugh he'd give the forge, though no one knew it then. Not long after, when the first frost kissed the ground, Eliar went to the hill for the last time. The townsfolk found him there the next morning, sitting beneath the oak with his hat in his lap, head tilted like he was, just watching the sunrise. His eyes were closed, but there was a smile on his face, peaceful, patient, done. They buried him right where he sat, covering him in soil, soft from the night rain. No one cried loud. Dustwater didn't mourn with noise. It mourned with stillness. Sable Buck, his hammer, cleaned it and hung it above the forge door. "He earned slow," she whispered. "Now it's my turn." The years that followed were golden ones. Under her care, the forge grew busses than then, but never rushed. Travelers still came, more now than before. They came from cities and villages, from places way time had turned cruel. Some walked stories of wars fought over metal. Others spoke of markets that rose and fell so fast that whole lives vanished between the two. Sable listened to them, then handed them tools. "Fix something," she'd say. "Start there what?" They did. Men who once fought over profit found peace, mending a wheel or sharpening a plow. Women who'd lost everything to the world greed learned how to make again, to hold again. The forge became a place not of trade, but of redemption. Each spark that flew from the anvil was like a small forgiveness set loose into the world. As Dustwater grew older, it didn't fade, it deepened, it became quieter, yes, but its silence held the sound of centuries breathing in rhythm. The oak had become a monument by then, so vast that you could stand under its boughs during a downpour and never feel a drop. Beneath it, the graves stretched far, names etched in simple letters, the timeline of patience itself. Seb would walk there each dusk, hand trailing along the old wood, whispering updates to the ones below. Still teaching, she'd say. Still waiting, still learning slow. She grew old too, y'all things do, but the fire never left her. On her final day, she hate the children to the forge. The air was still heavy with memory. "You keep this place lit," she told them. "Don't let the world talk you into hurrying. It's louder than you, but it ain't wiser." Her voice was a whisper by then, rough for kindling, and when you forget why you do it, go up the hill. The wind will remind you. She passed that night, quiet pace of breath, and when they laid her under the oak, a soft rain began to fall, just enough to make the soil shine. The children lit up and swore the drops fell in rhythm with the forge bellows, like the whole valley was breathing with her one last time. After that, Dustwater didn't stop. It never does. Each generation took what the last one left and gave it shape again. The forge stayed alive, the oak stayed wetful, and the sign faded now near to nothing was carved again deeper each time by new hands, so the message would never wash away. And in that eternal repetition, that endless care, the town found its immortality. Even when the world inside forgot its own name, even when history bent and broke, Dustwater remained, not then a myth, but the proof that patience ain't weakness, it's wealth, the kind that grows roots deeper than fear, stronger than gold. And so when the wind rolled through the valley at dusk, it carried not sorrow, not pride, but gratitude. Gratitude for the slow, the kind, the ones who waited when everyone else ran. Gratitude for the hands that built without owning, gave without keeping, left without leaving. The wind sighed through the branches and said it again, the words older than any man who'd have spoken them. Earn, slow, give often, leave early. And beneath the oak, the earth smiled back. In the centuries that followed, Dustwater became something else entirely. Not that a town, not even a place. It was an idea that lived in the quiet corners of people's hearts, a hum that stirred when a soul got tired of the world noise. They said you could still find it if you rode long enough, past where the highways turned to dirt and the dirt turned to memory. But you had to be looking for the right thing. Not gold, not glory, not escape. You had to be looking for enough. Most who went searching never found it. They'd come with maps, machines, and plans, thinking they could measure patience with the same tools they used for profit. But every so often, one would come back, changed, eyes softer, voice lower, like they'd touched something older than the world itself. They couldn't say that old they'd been, only that they'd sat by a fire that never burned out and listened to stories told in the language of rain. By then, the forge had become legend. Folks said the Vetable still stood under the great oak. Rustless despite the years the hammer rested atop it, like it was waiting for the right hands again. The sign had worn to near nothing, but the wind carried the words for those who could hear 'em. Earn slow, give often, leave early. That phrase outlasted every empire, every invention, every currency. It became the creed of the forgotten wise. Somewhere out there beyond the towns and the dust and the noise, a drifter named Cole rode with that creed in his pocket carved onto a splinter of wood he'd found in a pawn shop long ago. He didn't know where it came from, but he knew it felt right. He'd worked every job a man could: railroad, mines, lumber, and trade. He'd held silver and lost it, held gold and wasted it, held pride and learned how heavy it was. But that little piece of wood, smooth from years of handling, was the only thing he never sold. On nights when the world pressed too loud against his head, he'd pull it out, hold it up to the firelight, and whisper, "Earn slow." The words settled him, even when he didn't know why. He'd been wandering near 30 years when the trail led him to a valley the maps didn't name. Came upon it by accident, if accidents truly exist. The land opened before him like a breath, soft hills rolling into a river that gleamed under the moon. There was no sound but crickets, no light but starlight, and in the center of it, it stood that oak, impossibly tall, impossibly still. Cole froze. Something in his bones knew he'd seen this place before, maybe in a dream or a memory not his own. He tied his horse by the river and walked slow toward the tree. Up close he saw the graves, hundreds, maybe thousands, stretching out that the pages of a book no one had finished writing, each name carved with care, though barely visible from age. The ground beneath him felt warm, even in the cool air. When he reached the trunk, he saw what was left of the forge, a mound of stone and rusted iron, worn down but not gone. The anvil was there too, half buried, its surface smooth and blackened with time, and beside it the sign faded near to vanishing, but the word still whispered when the wind passed through. His out hand resting on the wood. "So this is where it came from," he said softly, pulling the little splinter from his coat. The grain matched. It fit like a puzzle piece lost too long. He laughed under his breath, a sound full of disbelief and reverence all tangled together. "Guess I found home after all." Cole built a small fire by the anvil that night. The flames flickered against the old metal, making it glow like it was breathing again. Didn't know if anyone was listening, but he talked anyway about the years, the jobs, the towns, the regrets. The air didn't answer, but it didn't need to. The silence was company enough. By dawn, he'd decided to stay a while. He rebuilt what he could of the forge stone by stone, iron by iron. His hands were slow but sure, and though he wasn't a smith by trade, it didn't matter. The work itself taught him. Every strike of the hammer sang a little clearer than the one before. He found scraps of old tools, remnants of lives that had passed through long before him, and he treated each one like a friend. By summer, the forge was whole again. Not new, not perfect, but alive. The first spark he struck caught fast, and for a moment he swore he heard laughter in the wind. He stayed years. Travelers would still stumble through, say maybe had, weary and lost. Cole would feed Em, listen to Em, teach him what little he knew. They'd ask what this place was, and he'd tell them what Tobias once told the banker daughter, what Wren told the children, what June whispered to the wind. It ain't a town, it a mirror. It shows you what you've been running from. Some left right after, spooked by the truth of it. Others stayed long enough to learn that wealth ain't made of coin, but of calm. The forge became a cool again, the river a teacher, the oak a cathedral. Cole grew old there, same as those before him, and when his time came, he didn't fight it. He walked up the hill at dawn, hatting in, and sat beneath the oak. Smiled once broad, tired, grateful, and then let the morning take him. Another traveler found him days later, buried him there, yet than the others had done, and carved his name into the wood. That traveler stayed too, and then another after him. Dustwater breathed again, not 'cause it been reborn, but 'cause it had never truly died. The valley didn't belong to time, it belonged to patience, and patience don't die, it changes its face. So the forge burns still, somewhere out there, under a sky too wide to own. Maybe you'll find it, maybe you won't. But if someday you wake to the sound of rain hitting the roof, gentle lay thought, and you feel a calm you can't explain, one that don't come from comfort or success, but from understanding, you'll know you're close. You'll know you found Dustwater. And if you listen close, you'll hear the words that outlived every age. carried soft on the wind, older than language, truer than gold. Earn slow, give often, leave early. Then you'll understand it ain't just a way to live, it the way to last. Long after cold time, the land itself began to shift, not by force or greed, but by the natural slow turning of things that lived too long to hurry. The creek changed its path, cutting a new curve through the valley. The forged stones settled deeper into the soil, their edges softened by moss. The oak still stood, mighty though its bark carried the years like wrinkles on a weather-redder face. Roots had reached down so deep that even earthquakes couldn't shake them. If you pressed your ear to the ground there, you could swear you heard a heartbeat. Not jet of the tree, but of all who'd worked, waited, and wandered through that quiet land. The world beyond Dustwater had changed more times than anyone could count. Empires that once thought themselves eternal had crumbled into memory. Currencies had come and gone like storms. The hum of machines had grown louder, then quieter, then louder again. But no matter how far mankind ran ahead, it always seemed to circle back to the same truth the valley had known since the start. What you chase too far, you lose too soon. One day, a young woman named Mara stumbled into the valley. She wasn't searching for peace, not exactly. She was searching for escape. The world she came from was made of noise, bright lights that never dimmed, clocks that never stopped, and people who'd forgotten how to breathe without hurry. She'd worked herself near to hollow, building a fortune that didn't buy her rest. When her father passed, leaving behind ledgers full of numbers but no warmth, she'd taken to wander in no direction, no care, just walking wherever the wind decided she ought to be. And that wind, that ever does, carried her straight to Dustwater. At first, she didn't even she'd arrived. There were no gates, no roads, no welcome signs, just a valley that seemed to sigh with recognition. The air was thick with the scent of rain and forge smoke. She found the old Denville half covered in moss, and sitting beside it, then though waiting just for her, was a journal leather-bound. The edges cracked, but the pages dropped. On the front, a simple carving, for whoever remembers. Mara sat down on the cool stone and opened it. Inside were pages filled with handwriting from 100 different hand notes, musings, sketches, bits of wisdom that looked like they'd been added one lifetime at a time. The first entry was written in a script so old it nearly faded into the page. We don't build for profit, we build for peace. The profit comes after if it earns slow enough. She turned another page. Work with your hands so your heart remembers what time feels like. Another. You don't give it away, it'll rot in your pocket. And one more, leave early, not 'cause you're done, but 'cause the world needs room to grow where you stood. She read till the light started to fade, and when she finally looked up, the stars had spilled out across the sky like 1,000 tiny fires. She felt something inside her shift, like her mind was learning to breathe again. And the next morning, she started to clean the forge. It wasn't out of duty or nostalgia, it was instinct. She swept the ash, cleared the weeds, stacked the stones back into a circle. When she found the old hammer rusted near through, she didn't throw it away. She polished it, wrapped the handle with fresh leather, and hung it by the anvil. "You've waited long enough," she said to it. The days turned into weeks, and before she knew it, people started coming. First, 1 or 2 wanderers left her, drawn by stories they couldn't quite explain. Then families who'd grown tired of rushing. Then strangers who'd wanted to sit where the silence was honest. Mara didn't turn any away. She gave them food, a bed, a task if they wanted one. She never had herself a teacher, but she became one anyway. When they asked what this place was, she'd smile and say, "A reminder. The forge burned again, not bright like a city, but steady like a heartbeat. Children learned to shape iron. The elders tended the fields. The oak gave shade to the weary and shelter to the dreamers." And every spring they met at the hill to whisper the creed. Not tell a rule, but to grind, say, leave early. Years passed, decades maybe. Dustwater grew and shrank, disappeared and returned. Sometimes it was a village, sometimes a sick soul keeping watch, but it always came back. The way patience always finds a way to bloom again, no matter how harsh the season. The journal Mara found became its new ledger, filled with the stories of those who'd come and gone. Each generation added to it, their ink mingling with the past, their words steady as the rain that fell each spring. Long after Mara herself joined the roots beneath the oak, a traveler found the book. He flipped through the pages, eyes wide, mouth open in quiet awe. "They're no author," he whispered. The old man beside him nodded. "That book patience don't belong to one man." The traveler stayed the night, sitting by the fire, listening to the forge sing its low, eternal song. "You think the world will learn this again?" he asked. The old man poked the coals. Maybe it never forgot. Maybe it's just waiting for folks to remember. That night the wind rose. It moved through the valley with a sound that 1,000 pages turning, like all the names, all the lives, all the years of Dustwater were whispering together in harmony. The stars above seemed to shimmer in rhythm, and for a moment the whole world felt balanced again, slow, kind, awake. When dawn came, the traveler packed his things. He didn't take the book. He didn't take the hammer. Didn't take nothing but the memory of how still his heart had been while he was there. And that was enough. He looked back once at the oak, its branches swaying in the soft wind, and tipped his hat. "I'll earn slow," he said quietly, promising somewhere deep in the earth beneath that mighty tree, a root shifted, stretching. There, a little further. The land smiled, the forge breathed. The world, just for a heartbeat, remembered itself. In the wind, ever faithful, carried on its back the only lesson worth carrying: earn slow, give often, leave early, because in the end, time don't belong to those who run, it belongs to those who listen. The years rolled on, softer tide, and the world outside of Dustwater spun itself faster and faster until it was near unrecognizable. Machines no longer clanked or wheezed. They hummed so quietly you could forget they were there. Cities stretched into the clouds and dipped below the earth, and people carried entire lives in the palms of their hand. Screens glowing mid their faces once looked at each other. But for all that speed, all that shine, they still found themselves running in place. The air was thick with progress, but thin with peace. It was a strange sort of poverty, full of everything but enough. And yet, now and then, a wanderer would still come stumbling down an unmarked trail, finding themselves in the valley where time refused to hurry. Dustwater had a way of disappearing from maps, but not from memory. The valley didn't fight for attention, waited. And waiting always wins in the end. One such wanderer was a boy named Nolan, barely 20, sharp-eyed but hollowed by a life that moved too quick. He'd grown numb in a place where even dreams came on the schedule. He'd made his first fortune at 16 and lost it before he turned 18. The kind of life that teaches a man numbers for it, that teaches him truth. When he reached Dustwater, his boots were worn through, his pockets empty, his mind humming with the ghosts of opportunity. He didn't come looking for salvation. He came because his body wouldn't let him keep going. The road had decided for him. He found the forge by smell first, the clean metallic warmth of iron breathing through the air. Devil still stood, though its edges had rounded smooth with time. The hammer hung where it always had. There was no one inside, just a faint glow in the coals, as though the fire itself had decided to stay lit until someone else showed up to tend it. Nolan stared at it a long while before, whispering, "Wait on him." He slept by the forge that night, the fire crackling low beside him, dreaming of faces he didn't recognize, old souls with kind eyes and hands blackened by work. When he woke, he felt rested for the first time in years. The forge didn't speak, but it didn't have to. The quiet was less than enough. He started working without thinking about why. Gathering wood, sweeping hay, fixing the roof. His hands, once used to pressing buttons and signing contracts, began remembering weight and warmth. The rhythm of it pulled him in. The soft scrape of metal, the exhale of the bellows, the pulse of the flame. Before long, he forgot about fortune altogether. He did work slow and sure, as though time itself was breathing along with him. Days turned into seasons. The valley grew familiar, like an old song half remembered from childhood. He met others who wandered through, an old sailor who'd lost his ship, a mother carrying her child away from war, a poet whose words had stopped meaning anything in the city. Each of them stayed a while, did their part, then left without saying goodbye. That was the way of Dustwater. No arrivals, no departures, just continuance. Nolan found the journal one day, the same one Mara had kept, now swollen with new pages and ink from the hands long gone. Read that cover to cover, sitting under the oak while the sun set slow. Every page felt like a conversation he'd been missing his whole life. Work, quiet, one line. Read loud, work dies young. Another gold is a guest. Let it stay, but don't beg it to. When he finished, he set the book down, heart heavy, in that sweet way like he'd yet been told the truth and couldn't unhear it. He turned his eyes up to the branches above, whispering, "So this is what wealth feels like." From that day on, Nolan became the valley quiet keeper. He never taught himself that, but the land did. He tended the forge, mended the fences, kept the journal open for whoever came next. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words carried the slow weight of things worth listening to. You can't outsmart time. He'd tell visitors, you can't outwait it. He stayed there decades long after his hair went silver and his back bent under the kindness of years. Sometimes he'd walk to the river and see his reflection blind, soft, content. The boy who once ran for success was gone. In his place stood a man who had finally learned the value of staying still, and in that stillness, Dustwater grew not in size, but in reach. Its story spread quiet across the world, carried by those who'd come and gone. People started whispering of it again, the valley where coins rusted but hearts shined, where silence talked louder than sermons, where the rich came poor and the poor left rich. Some said it was heaven, others said it was a myth. But those who knew better that smiled and said, "No, it's just patience." The day Nolan passed, the forge didn't go cold. The wind carried the flame gentle through the cracks, feeding it enough to stay alive until the next hand came along. Someone always did. That how Dustwater worked, it didn't end, it handed itself forward. Like time, like love, like wealth earned, too slow to lose. And somewhere long after, a child would find the sign again old, carved deep, but still true. They traced the letters with their small fingers, whispering the words without knowing what they meant yet. But someday they would. Someday everyone does. Earn slow, give often, leave early. And in that whisper the world would turn a little gentle, the fire would burn a little longer, and patience, ever faithful and quiet, would smile once more. Long after Nolan bones had settled into the soil, Dustwater lived on the breath of stories. It didn't need stone or steel to keep itself alive, just memory. The kind passed down on firesides and whispered in the hush between heartbeats. Some said the valley still glowed at dusk, that a light shimmered there, not from flame, but from the warmth of all who'd come to understand. Others claimed that if you stood quiet enough near a river anywhere in the world, you might hear the same slow rhythm, like an anvil humming under the earth. Folks argued whether Dustwater was real, but the ones who'd felt it never bothered to convince anyone. Truth that deep don't need defense. It just waits to be rediscovered. In one of those far-off cities that had long forgotten how to rest, a young man named Alder worked in a tower of glass. Was clever in the way people mistake exhaustion for talent. Every morning he woke before the sun and fed his mind to numbers that grew but never satisfied. His life was clean, efficient, precise, and hollow. Each success felt smaller than the last, and each night he fell asleep wondering why a full pocket could make a man feel so empty. One stormy evening, when the power cut out and the city went dark for the first time in decades, Alder found himself wandering through the rain. He didn't know what he was going, only that he couldn't stand still anymore. That walk became a journey that stretched days, then weeks, as if the world itself was nudging him toward that place quieter. When the storm finally broke, he stood before a valley that shimmered with mist. The road behind him had disappeared. The air for him smelled of wet earth and forge smoke. He followed it, slow, until he saw the oak. It was older now than any tale could merit, its branches twisted into the sky like veins of time itself. Beneath that, the forge still stood, smaller than he imagined, but alive in the way simple things often are. He stepped closer, his reflection flickering in the metal dull shine. "What is this place?" he whispered. The voice that answered came not from a man, but from the wind, a question waiting on an answer. He stayed, not out of faith, not even out of hope, just out of curiosity. The first few days he tried to fix things. The forge, the roof, the tools he measured, planned, optimized, just like he'd been taught. But everything he touched seemed to resist. The hammer wouldn't strike right. The fire burned either too wild or too weak. The land itself refused to hurry for him. It wasn't until he gave up and sat down, hands black with soot, that he finally made it how the silence wrapped around him like a friend. He listened. The creek murmured. The leaves whispered. The embers sighed. For the first time in years, he felt the noise inside his skull quiet down. And in that quiet, he heard words he didn't recognize but somehow remembered. Earn slow, give often, leave early. He found the journal the next day, still there on the shelf, its pages yellowed but intact. It opened right to a page that seemed to be waiting for him. The ink was faint, the handwriting steady. The world teaches speed, the soil teaches timing. Choose who you learn from. He smiled, closed the book, and set to work again. But this time, he didn't measure. He listened. The forge didn't fight him anymore. The fire caught and held steady. He struck the anvil, slow and sure, and the sound that came out was not work. It was peace. By nightfall, he'd forgotten why he needed more than this. As the years passed, Alder became another quiet part of Dustwater rhythm. He built a new roof, carved a new bench under the oak, repaired the Evel so its voice rang clear once again. When wanderers came, he offered them tea and time. You don't owe this place nothing, he'd tell them. But it might owe you something if you sit still long enough. Some stayed, some left. But it carried a piece of Dustwater with them, the way a scent clings to clothes long after you've left the fire. They picked that patience back into the world, and bit by bit the world began to remember. Market slowed. People paused before speaking. Some even planted trees just to see them grow, not to sell them. Nobody said it out loud, but patience was coming back like rain in a dry season. All it took was one valley that refused to vanish. When Alder grew old, he'd sit under the oak each dusk, watching the light fade gold across the hills. The forge still whispered beside him, the smoke rising gentle lane thought. He kept the journal by his side, reading from it to whoever came near. Sometimes children, sometimes strangers. Sometimes no one at that. If he'd muse aloud, how the smallest place can hold the biggest truth. The day he passed, there was no sadness, only gratitude. The valley breathed around him, feel if it knew. The oak shed a flurry of leaves that settled soft over his still hands. Someone added his name to the long list carved into the wood, and beneath it, a sill lied. He listened till the silence answered back. Decades later, when another wanderer found Dustwater, the forge still stood. The book still waited. The sign was barely legible, but the words still sang through the wind, these clear as, earn slow, give often, leave early. It was the same lesson the world kept forgetting, and the earth kept repeating. Because patience, true patience, ain't just about waiting. It's about knowing that the things are worth outlasting yourself for. The wanderer knelt, hand on the old anvil, eyes closed. I hear you, he whispered. The wind rustled through the branches in reply. The same rhythm it had kept since the first spark, the same hum that would et long after the last. And so the story continued, not in a tale, but in a cycle. Dustwater endures, not because it guarded, but because it remembered. And that long in one person somewhere chooses to breathe slow, to give more than they take, to walk away before greed takes root. Dustwater lives. The forge, the oak, the wind, they all know. They've seen the rise and fall of ages, and through it their truth has never cracked. It ain't gold. It ain't glory. It's something smaller, humbler, stronger. It's this. If you listen long enough to what the quiet telling you, you'll find every answer you've chased. And when you do, you'll understand why the wise ones left early, because once you find peace, there's no need to stay and prove. And the valley, it always did, whispered one more time, earn slow, give often, leave early. The rest is silence. There's one thing about silence. It don't mean nothing until you've lived through enough noise to crave it. That's what the next soul to find Dustwater learned, though she didn't know it right away. Her name was Ione, a name the world had forgotten how to pronounce right. Same that it forgot how to rest. She came from a line of people who thought hurry was a virtue and tiredness was proof of success. When she found the valley, her heart was still humming with the rhythm of deadlines and promises she couldn't remember making. She didn't land to stay. She just meant to catch her breath. But breathing in Dustwater has a way of changing a person. The air tastes like memory we're like metal and rain and stories that don't care how important you used to be. The forge had gone quieted in by the time she arrived. The coals were cold, the youth, Livesville slick with dew. She built a small fire nearby just to stay warm, sitting cross-legged with her back to the oak, watching the smoke curl up into the gay morning. Somewhere in the wind, she thought she heard a voice humming, low, steady, patient. It wasn't a song, not really, just the sound of time remembering itself. She closed her eyes and for the first time in her life didn't think about tomorrow. When she woke, the sun was up and the journal was sitting beside her. It hadn't been there when she fell asleep. The leather was cracked, the corners worn down to softness, and the edges smelled faintly of ash. A ribbon of twine held it shut. She hesitated a moment, then untied it, flipping through the pages. The last entry was fresh new ink, new hand, dated only days morning. It read, "If you find this, you're ready to listen. Don't look for the teacher, the forge will do." She did. She started small, same as the others before her. Clearing leaves, brushing sock from the walls, feeding dry twigs into the old pit. At first, she kept checking her watch, see if she had somewhere else to be. But after a few days, the habit fell away. There was no schedule here, no go beyond the next sunrise. The land didn't rush her. It just watched, quiet and sure, waiting for her to match its rhythm. When she finally struck her first spark, it felt the earth itself exhale. By the end of that week, Dustwater had a heartbeat ebb. Travelers began to drift in, drawn by something they couldn't name. A father carrying his boy, a woman running from the kind of loneliness that money can't fix, a musician who hadn't played a note in years. They came in silence, stayed in stillness, and left softer than they arrived. Ione never asked their stories. She didn't need to. Dustwater didn't take confessions. It gave forgiveness. Every night she'd sit by the forge and read a few pages from the journal aloud, even when no one was there. The words sounded different when spoken to the fire. They grew heavier, truer, as Rain Tippy said. Again, patience is the one currency that don't lose value, she'd read. The more you spend it, the richer you get. Sometimes when the wind blew right, she'd swear she could hear voices in reply, laughter murmurs, the hammer song echoing faintly through the trees. Maybe it was just memory. Maybe it was the forge remembering the ones who tended it. Either way, she found comfort in the thought that nobody had truly left Dustwater. They just became part of its silence. One evening, a storm rolled in heavy from the west. Thunder crawled across the sky, and the wind roared through the valley like a long-delayed conversation. They only stayed by the fire, feeding it dead enough to hold. She'd learned not to fight storms, only to wait them out. When the rain came, she stepped out and let it soak her through. The forge hissed and steamed, but the flame stayed alive, stubborn and low. She laughed then, throwing her arms wide, shouting into the storm, "Is that all you got?" And when the thunder answered, it didn't sound angry. It sounded proud. After the rain passed, the world felt clean again. She walked up the hill, the grass glittering under the moon, and stood before the oak. The sign was almost gone by then, the wood worn thin from centuries of breath and weather. But she traced that the words should be, whispering them anyway. Earn slow. Give often. Leave early. Not yet, she said softly, but I will. From then on, Ione became the valley caretaker. She didn't claim it, didn't name it. She just kept the fire lit, taught the children who passed through how to hold a hammer, how to breathe with the world instead of against it. The journal filled again, her handwriting mixing with the hands before hers until you couldn't tell where one life ended and the next began. When she grew old, her hair white and her fingers knotted with work, she still lit the forge each morning. "You never know who'll come by," she'd say to the flames. If they'd crackle in agreement, she died in her sleep one summer night, sitting upright in her chair, a faint smile resting on her lips. The forge stayed warm for 3 days without a soul tending it, as if refusing to go cold until her story was finished. When a new traveler came, drawn by the scent of smoke, he found the journal open to the last page. The ink wasn't dry yet. It read, "The secret ain't in the fire, it in the waiting between sparks." He closed the book, bowed his head, and whispered the creed that never faded. Earn slow, give often, leave early. And as he spoke, the valley seemed to sigh, a long, content breath that carried through the trees, over the hills and out into the world beyond. Maybe the wind took it to other valleys, other restless hearts. Maybe it just held there, hanging soft in the air, waiting for the next soul to listen. Either way, Dustwater remained. It always does. You can't bury patience and you can't rush peace. They don't die, they wait. And so the story carried on, humming low beneath the rain, under the stars, inside the quiet hearts of those who remembered how to listen. Earn slow, give off and leave early. That was never their way. It was the world once, and someday it'd be dead. Years passed and Dustwater slipped deeper into the cracks of legend, no less real, the quieter. The world above it kept spinning faster, louder, glossier, so loud that truth had to whisper to be heard. But whispers, when they last long enough, start to sound like songs. And the song of Dustwater, the hum of patience, the forged breath, the rhythm of a soul that knew how to wait, still drifted across generations like smoke from a fire that refused to die. In a far-off city built of glass and iron, a professor named Lowell taught economics to students who'd never held dirt in their hands. He talked about growth curves, return rates, and market cycles, but deep down, he knew he was teaching ghosts numbers without breath. He'd once believed that mastery of money meant mastery of meaning, but each year left him empty. When his wife passed and his lectures turned into echoes, he found himself collecting silence instead of accolades. Then one night, he dreamed of a valley. No map, no name, just an oak, a forge, and a phrase carved into wood. When he woke, his chest hurt with something he couldn't explain. The next day, he left his classroom mid-lecture and never went back. He walked for weeks, following not a compass but a feeling, a pulse just under the surface of things, guiding him towards stillness. When he stumbled into the valley, his knees gave out. It wasn't exhaustion, it was reverence. He knew before he saw the oak that he'd found the place from his dream. The forge stood quiet, yet warm, as if it had been waiting. On the anvil lay the journal, open to a page that read every teacher as a student with a longer memory. He laughed soft, broken, free, and sat himself down beside it. He stayed. He didn't fix a thing for the first month, just listened. The birds, the creek, the wind shifting through the leaves. It was a harder education than all his years at the university. Patience don't hand out diplomas, it hands out reckoning. He learned that quickly. When he finally did touch the forge, he didn't try to master it. He let it teach him. He struck the anvil once a day, no more, no less. Learned the tone of time in metal, the way heat could humble a man. Iron don't rush, he murmured one. Dusk and neither should I. That became his prayer. Visitors still came, though fewer now. A pair of runaways who thought wealth was freedom. A woman who'd traded her heart for reputation. A young inventor who'd forgotten what his own hands were for. Lowell taught them the same way the valley had taught him, without words, without pushing. The world moved fast enough, he'd say. Let this place remind you what slow feels like. Under his care, Dustwater found its rhythm again. He rebuilt the fences, replanted the orchard that had gone to seed, polished the evil till it gleamed like moonlight. Every evening he'd light a small lantern and leave it hanging on the branch of the oak. It wasn't for him, it was for whoever might come next. A light for the lost, he called it. Even if they never find their way here, maybe the world, it'll feel it. And maybe it did. Because across oceans and deserts, people started slowing down debt. Not many got enough. A banker who chose to forgive a debt instead of collect it. A farmer who decided not to plant for profit that year, but for soil rest. A teacher who threw out half her lessons just to let her students think. None of them knew about Dustwater, but the valley patience was moving through them with the same. You can't cage a rhythm like that. It travels through kindness, through generosity, through the simple act of not taking more than your share of breath. Lowell grew old with grace. His hair turned silver, his eyes turned soft, and his hands, once meant for chalk and pens, turned calloused and strong. Never called himself the keeper of Dustwater. I'm just its guest. He'd say, same every one before. Each spring, he'd write one new page in the journal, careful and slow, his letters large enough for the next soul to read. The last thing he wrote before his hand gave out was this: if the world forgets us then, that all right, truth, don't vanish. It just waits for someone patient enough to listen. He passed under the oak one autumn, even and sitting on the same bench Alder once carved. The forge was still warm when they found him. The fire didn't go out that night. It glowed steady, gentle, like a candle refusing to bow to dark. They buried him beneath the oak with the others, a stone set simple above him. He taught time how to breathe again. Centuries would pass. The oak would grow wide enough to swallow the sky. The forge would crumble, rebuild, and crumble again. Names would fade from the journal pages. The language might even change. But the hum of Dustwater would stay. It would move in the soil, in the rain, in the quiet between two heartbeats. And when the world got loud again, as it always does, It would send its message through the wind like a letter from eternity. Some would hear it in dreams, others in the hush before dawn. And a few, those who were tired enough to listen, would follow it, one by one, until they found themselves standing made. Patience began. Maybe the oak won't be there by then, maybe the forge will just be dust. But the lesson will still hum beneath their feet, same way it always has. Earn slow, give often, leave early, because patience don't die. It changes its storytellers, and when the next one sits by a small fire in the rain, their voice drawling soft and steady, they'll tell this same tale not from memory, but from inheritance. And whoever listening will feel the quiet in their bones and know they've come home. Dustwater ain't a place, it a promise. Someday, far beyond any name remembered or any map still drawn, a small group of travelers came walking down the valley trail again. There were 5 of them, 3 adults, 2 children dressed not in the old leathers and wool of the past, but in strange soft fabrics that shimmered under the light. They didn't come with carts or beasts of burden. They carried nothing but small packs, a few tools, and the kind of weariness that don't come from distance but from living too long among noise. They'd heard whispers about this place, a valley that wasn't on any chart. Their people still remembered the right way to live. They didn't believe it, not when, but they followed the rumor anyway, maybe hoping that peace still had a place to hide. The valley greeted them the same way it always had, with silence that felt alive. The air was thick with the smell of wet iron and pine, the kind that makes a person breathe deeper without meaning to. They stood there for a long while, listening. The wind brushed past, and in it they thought they heard the fainted hum of a forge, though no smoke rose anywhere in sight. The children went running ahead, laughing, their feet kicking up dust from a trail that hadn't seen footprints in a long time. The adults followed slow, their hearts pounding with something that felt a lot like memory. They found the oak first. It towered above everything, branches twisting wide-being, the sky roots thick as a man's torso. Around it lay stones, mossy and half-sunk, each one carved with names too old to read. One of the travelers, a woman with sharp eyes and soft hands, knelt to brush the dirt from a marker. Her fingertips traced a single word still legible near the base. Patience. She smiled faintly. Guess we're in the right place. When they found the forge, it was little more than a shell. The roof had long since caved in, the walls bent low by time, but the evel still stood, blackened and unbroken. The eldest traveler, a man gay around the temple, stepped forward and laid his hand on it. The metal was cool but steady, as if holding a memory of heat. He turned to the others. "You feel that?" he asked. The others nodded. It waiting said, the smallest of the children, his voice barely above a whisper. They made camp that night beside the forge, building a small fire those before them had done. The flames licked at the air, and sparks drifted up to vanish among the stars. After they'd eaten, the woman pulled out a small machine from her bag, a screen, faintly glowing. She set it down near the fire and said, "We should record this. Nobody will believe it otherwise." But when she pressed the button, the screen flickered, glitched, and died. She frowned, trying again, but it wouldn't take. The old man chuckled. "Maybe it don't want to be recorded." The girl beside him smiled. "Then we'll just remember it the way they did." The next morning, one of the children found the journal. It was buried half under the ash of what used to be a hearth, the leather worn to near cloth. He brought it to the woman, eyes wide at full, he said, and it was every page edge to edge, with words from hundreds of hands. The first pages were faded, written in ink so pale it looked like whispers, but near the back a filled light had been added in newer ink. Got 3 words: still breathing, still teaching. The travelers didn't speak for a long while after that. They just sat with it, letting the truth of it settle into their bones. The old man finally broke the silence. "It ain't a story," he said. "It's a memory that never died, man." With that, they went to work, not rebuilding, not changing, just tending. They cleared the weeds, lifted the fallen beams, cleaned the soot from the edvel. One of the children fetched water from the creek, laughing when he tripped and splashed half of it down his boots. The woman bed stones for a new fire pit. The old man patched what he could of the roof with branches and bark. By sundown, the forge didn't look new, but it looked loved-in. That was enough. That night, they lit the coals for the first time in what must have been centuries. The fire caught easy, though the air itself had been waiting for the spark. The glow spread, filling the forge with that familiar heartbeat rhythm, steady and low. The youngest boy sat cross-legged beside it, eyes wide, whispering, yet humming. The others leaned in. It was true, the metal sang, not loud, not sharp, just a long, even tone that seemed to reach through the years. The woman closed her eyes and let the warmth wash over her. "Feel seek forgiveness," she said. They stayed in dust water through the winter. The valley fed them in ways they couldn't explain. The land seemed to provide what was needed, never too much, never too little. When spring came, flowers bloomed where their footprints had been, and the creek ran clearer than before. One morning, the old man took the journal and wrote the first new entry in 100 years. "We came with machines. We're leaving with memory. Dust water don't need to be found. It just waits for hearts that remember how to listen." Before they left, they carved the sign again, fresh, deep, and true. The wood gleamed in the light of dawn. They stepped back to read it aloud together. "Earn slow, give often, leave early." The children recited it twice, voices trembling but strong, like they knew they were speaking to more than wood. Then they packed what little they had, doused the fire, and walked out the way they came. When they turned back for one last look, the valley shimmered under the sun, the oaks standing proud, the forge breathing smoke once more. Far down the trail, the little boy asked, "Do you think anyone else will find it?" The old man smiled, eyes glinting with the kind of wisdom that don't belong to a single life. "Baby," he said. When they're ready, the wind rose behind them, whispering through the grass. The valley sighed its ancient refrain, "Earn slow, give often, leave early." The lesson lived on, not in books or maps, but in the quiet hearts of those who'd heard it once and never forgot. And somewhere beneath that endless sky, dust water waited, patient, dill itty, and joy enough. It would never need to call anyone home, only remind them they'd never really left. Years turned into centuries again, and the trail to dust water vanished beneath the wild growth of the world. The forest crept close, the creek changed its course, and the wind carried its song across plains no map dared to chart. The people who once whispered its name were long gone, but the name itself had become something bigger than a place. It was an idea that found new homes wherever patience was practiced. There were rumors, sure, of towns rebuilt in its image, of communities that lived without clocks, of men and women who carried the creed carved into their rings or written on the backs of their hands. The words never died, they just drifted, taking root wherever someone paused long enough to listen. And somewhere beneath that endless sky, dust water waited, patient is, knowing it would never need to call anyone home, only remind them they'd never really left. Years turned into centuries again, and the trail to dust water vanished beneath the wild growth of the world. The forest crept close, the creek changed its course, and the wind carried its song across plains no map dared to chart. The people who once whispered its name were long gone, but the name itself had become something bigger than a place. It was an idea that found new homes wherever patience was practiced. There were rumors, sure, of towns rebuilt in its image, of communities that lived without clocks, of men and women who carried the creed carved into their rings or written on the backs of their hands. The words never died, they just drifted, taking root wherever someone paused long enough to listen. But time, it always does, bent again. The world grew clever in ways that made even the stars look small. Men spoke to machines more than each other. The hum of progress grew into a roar, and silence became the rarest thing the soul could find. Money turned to numbers no one could touch. Work became thought, and thought became noise. Patience, once the foundation of peace, was now thawed in efficiency. Still, in the heart of all that brilliance and confusion, something ancient stirred, the same small ache that had sent wanderers to the valley ages old, that ache for enough. Among those who felt it was a woman named Sarah, though no one had thought her that anymore. In her world, names were just tags used by machines to sort and label. She was a developer, one of the minds that built the programs that made other people's lives easier and her own empty. The system she helped design could predict human behavior down to the second, yet it couldn't tell her why she felt so tired all the time. Every night she'd look out over the glowing sprawl of the megacity, and though she lived in the tallest tower, she'd never felt smaller. One day her screen froze, not the way they usually did, with error codes or red lights, but frozen completely. No sound, no light, no hum, just stillness. Then, across the blank surface, 3 words appeared. Earn slow, give often, leave early. She thought it was a glitch, a ghost in the system. But when she tried to trace it, there was no source, no origin. The code simply wasn't there. She stared at those words for a long while, heart thudding, a strange warmth blooming behind her ribs. She didn't understand it, but she felt that the same way a seed must feel sunlight before its bed knows what to do with it. That night, she packed a bag and left the city without telling a soul. She traveled for weeks, blowing old maps that led nowhere, old stories that contradicted themselves. The further she went, the quieter the world became. The air changed too. It stopped smelling like iron and data and started smelling like rain. One day, without meaning to, she walked right into Dustwater, or Road Dustwater walked into her. It didn't look like much at first, just hills and silence and the skeleton of a forge that hadn't burned in 1,000 years. But when she stepped closer, she swore the ground breathed. The air carried a pulse so faint she had to close her eyes to hear it. It wasn't her imagination. The forge was humming, the same low, patient sound that had taught 100 lost souls before her what wealth truly meant. Sarah stayed for months. She didn't know what to do at first. Her hands weren't used to real work. They'd spent their life dancing over glass screens, not soil or stone. But the valley didn't judge it. It waited. She built small fires, led water, patched what she could. Eventually, she found the valve, half buried, covered in moss, thick velvet. She cleaned it until the metal showed through in, and for the first time in years, she felt proud, not of efficiency, but of effort. The journal was still there, too. It had stayed hands so many times its pages had gone translucent, the ink faded into ghost shapes. But one phrase remained dark and clear near the back, written in the sharp hand of someone long gone. Patience is how the future forgives the past.
With sorrow read it over and over until she cried, though she couldn't have told you why.
Days turned to seasons. The forge came back to life. The oak, impossibly old, still stood guard above it, its leaves a language only the wind could read. Sura began to write in the journal herself, not about the city she'd left or the world that forgot her name, but about the small miracles of waiting. I planted seeds today, one entry read. I don't care if I'm here when they bloom. Another silence doesn't ask for attention, it gives it. Eventually, others found her. A boy with a broken drone. A woman who couldn't stand another day of perfection. An old man who'd outlived every reason to rush. They stayed, helped, listened. Dustwater grew again, not in size, but in soul. The forge burned steady. The journal filled. The creed was spoken once more by voices new but faithful. When Sarah time came, she didn't fear it. She sat beneath the oak, same made those before her, hands folded over the book, eyes lifting toward the sky. I earned slow, she whispered. I gave often, then she smiled. Guess it time to leave early. After her, the valley slept again, not gone, just waiting. That's the thing about Dustwater. It never dies. It just breathes quieter until the next weary soul remembers where peace is buried. And somewhere, out beyond the noise, the wind carried on its endless promise, soft and sure weight, a heartbeat older than mankind itself. Earn slow, give often, leave early. It a lesson that don't belong to the past or the future. It belongs to anyone tired enough to listen, to anyone who ready to stop running and start remembering. And when they do, they'll find the valley again, not in dirt or maps, but in themselves. Because Dustwater was never built on land. It was built on time, somewhere beyond the edge of time itself. The wind carried that creed farther than even the stars could measure. It landed, it didn't bring gold or fame. It brought stillness. It found a man named Jonah, sitting on a rusted porch swing in a town that progress had forgotten. Wasn't a scholar or a trader. Said a man who'd lived through too many false promises. The kind of man who'd seen fortunes rise and fall so fast they might well have been mirages. He'd spent half his life chasing what the world calls success, fast money, loud rewards, and applause that echoed hollow. But one night, sitting under a sky heavy with rain, he realized he couldn't remember what it felt like to mean anything. That when the whisper came. It was not a voice, not exacted. More like a memory wearing the shape of sound. 3 words, old words, ancient, but familiar. Like they'd been carved somewhere in his marrow long before he was born. Earn slow, give often, leave early. He said it aloud, though he didn't know why. The wind answered with a low hum that rolled across the field like a sigh of relief. That night, Jonah packed a small bag, a flask, a lantern, a notebook, and started walking. He didn't know where he was headed, only that his boots seemed to know, for he did. Days bled into nights and nights into something else. He followed the hum whenever the wind carried it. Through valleys of forgotten farms, past ghost towns whose every window looked like a memory, and across hills that whispered stories of people who'd once stopped there, same may him. He began noticing signs, little ones, and Ardville etched into a stone by the road, a tree whose bark bore faint letters worn near to dust, the fainted smell of iron and rain when the wind turned just right. When he finally found Dustwater, it was near dark. The moon hung low, the air thick with the sound of cicadas. Believe it, the forge was still there, though time had reshaped it again, its stone sunken, its roof swallowed by moss. But the anvil stood proud, dust, untouched by decay. He set his lantern down beside it, lit a small fire, and waited. He didn't know what for, but somehow waiting felt right. As the fire caught, the forge began to hum. Slow, gentle, familiar, the same hum that had carried him across all those miles. He sat back and closed his eyes, letting it soak through him, but that when he saw him, not in flesh, but in flickers. Figures moving through the edges of light. A man with soot-stained hands hammering iron that glowed like sunrise. A woman reading from a journal by firelight. A boy laughing they fetched water from the creek. And that in the center of it stood an oak so wide it could have held up the sky itself. They didn't speak to him. They didn't need to. He already knew what they were saying. He reached for his notebook and began to write. Not about money, not about work, about what it meant to stop counting what couldn't be kept. His words came easy, like the forge itself was guiding his hand. He wrote about patience and how it ain't the art of waiting at the courage to stay. About wealth that don't live in vaults but in moments. About the strange kind of peace that comes only when you give up the need to win. By dawn, the pages were full. He tore one out and laid it on the easel, letting the ashes from the fire kiss the edge of the paper. Letting wind caught carrying it away, scattering his words into the world, he smiled. Guess at the point he said, you don't hold on, you just pass it along. He stayed a while longer, mending what little he could. He cleaned the forge, stacked wood for whoever came next, and carved a small stone with the same 3 words that had brought him there. Then one morning he packed his things again. When he turned to leave, the sun was rising, painting the valley gold. The forge was humming again, low and strong, like it was saying goodbye. Jonah tipped his hat to it. You'll be all right, he whispered. You always are. He left, just like the creed said. Slow, grateful, early. Years later, long after he'd gone, travelers found the forge again. They found the carvings, the ashes, the journal with pages both ancient and new. And though they didn't know his name, they felt him there woven into the hum, folded into the patience that lived in the valley bones. They wrote their own words beside his, adding to the story that had no author and no end, a living record of all the souls who'd learned that peace ain't something you chase, it's something you return to. Generation would come and go. The world would keep changing faster than end, but Dustwater would always wait, because Dustwater wasn't just a place. It was an inheritance, the last wealth no one could steal, a story that could only be understood when the noise of the world faded enough to hear it whisper, earn slow, give often, leave early. And maybe on a rain-heavy night far from that valley, someone sitting alone by the window will hear that same hum drift through the thunder and feel it stir something deep inside. They'll close their eyes, set down their worries, and smile without knowing why. Because Dustwater ain't gone, it's sick, traveling, and so long as there a VIN heartbeat in this wide, restless world that still knows how to wait. The forge will keep on humming. By the time the world forgot what patience even sounded like, Dustwater had already found new ways to be remembered. You see, the valley never needed bodies to keep its story alive. It needed breath, a word spoken soft enough to carry, a rhythm steady enough to last. That rhythm, that hum of iron and fire, started showing up in places no one expected. Radio signals, wind turbines, even in the static between 2 frequencies on a digital band. Folks who were listening close enough started hearing. Some thought it was interference, others thought it was an error in the code, but the ones who re-listened, they knew. It was the forge whispering through the noise again. One such listener was a truck driver named Ray. He'd spent 30 years crossing the country, delivering things he never cared to open. His rig was his home, his cabin filled with maps and half-empty coffee cups, his radio always on to fill the silence. But one night, Driving through a stretch of highway so lonely it seemed to bend the stars, his radio started to hum. Not music, not voices, just a low, warm tone that settled right in the middle of his chest. He turned the dial, but no matter where he tuned, the hum followed. It was patient, inviting, like a fire seen from miles away. He pulled over near an abandoned rest stop, killed the engine, and stepped out. The air smelled of wet earth and long miles. The hum didn't fade. It grew clearer. It wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from the ground. He looked out over the field beside the road, and there, through the mist, he saw a faint orange glow flickering thick beyond a line of trees. He hesitated a long moment before walking toward it, boots sinking into the mud. When he reached the clearing, there was no fire, no camp, no people. Just an anvil sitting in the grass, old and scarred, steam rising faintly from its surface. He knelt beside it, running a calloused hand across the metal. It was warm like something alive. He chuckled under his breath. "Well, I'll be damned," he said softly. "Found you, didn't I?" Ray wasn't a man of big words, but he'd carried heavy ones inside him for years. Regrets mostly, roads not taken, apologies never spoken. He sat there beside the Evel until dawn, listening. The hum didn't stop once, and matched the beat of his heart, slowing it, steadying it, until the ache he'd been dragging behind him all those years began to ease. When he finally stood, he felt lighter, not fixed, but forgiven. He left his old CB mic there on the anvil before he walked away. "Might they well give you something useful," he muttered with a smile. When the sun rose, the anvil gleamed bright morning steel, and the hum shifted deeper, fuller, as though it had just accepted another story into its song. Months later, other truckers started reporting the same sound. They'd be driving through quiet stretches of land when their radios would catch that low tone again. Some said it calmed their engines. Others swore it made them cry without knowing why. They called it a ghost channel, and though no one had claimed to find its search, they said the same thing. It made them remember who they were, and that how Duskwater lived again. Not at a place, but at a frequency. A hum even inside the world own noise. It found its way into the hearts of tired folks who'd forgotten how to wait, how to breathe, how to be. It didn't judge, it did waited for them to tune in. Ray kept driving after that, but something in him had changed. He stopped rushing loads, stopped counting miles. He began picking up travelers, folks looking for more than a ride. To each one, he'd tell a small piece of the story, never the whole thing, just enough to plant the seed. "There's a hum out there," he'd say, "somewhere between the silence and the storm. If you hear it, don't turn away. That life trying to teach you how to be still, they'll hit." One night, years later, he parked his rig for the last time. He left a note on the dashboard. 6 words written in shaky ink. "The road don't end. It rests." They found his hat hanging on the side mirror, his truck still humming softly, though the key was not in the ignition. The sound that came from the radio that day, no one could record it. The machines wouldn't take. But the men who stood there swear they felt it in their bones, like the earth itself was bread, what's it said, like peace was finally finding its way back. Years later, the kid riding shotgun with his father on a long-haul route would twist the dial late at night, catch a faint tone between static, and ask, "What that sound?" And his father would smile the same way Ray once did, and answer, "At the world remembering itself." The legend of Duskwater never needed a map or even a name. It just needed listeners. The kind of people who knew that the truest wealth ain't in what you build, but in what you mend. The kind who understand that peace ain't given, it waited for. And longings that are seal-tired soul pulling over to breathe beneath the same sky that once hung above the valley, the hum will keep playing. Maybe that what heaven is, not pearly gates or endless glory, just a forge somewhere in the quiet humming under the rain, waiting for you to sit down beside it and remember. Earn slow, give often, leave early. And in that moment, when you do, the hum will rise to meet your heartbeat. You'll know you've come home. Long after the hum found its way into the machines and the minds of wanderers, it began to drift higher, reaching places it had never touched before. Satellites orbiting the world started picking up faint, rhythmic pulses in their background data patterns no engineer could explain, tones that matched no human transmission. Scientists tried to filter it out, calling it noise, cosmic interference, but one of them, a quiet woman named Alina, kept listening. The rhythm reminded her of something, not numbers, not data, but a heartbeat. She didn't tell anyone at first. Some truths don't need announcement, they need remembrance. She worked the late shift alone in the lab, her monitor glowing against the dark. When the hum came through Ud steady and low, she leaned close and whispered, "Where are you coming from?" The speakers hissed, then answered with a sound she swore was breathing. Not mechanical, not artificial, natural, ancient. She pulled the data logs and traced it back, triangulating coordinates that didn't make sense. The signal wasn't coming from the stars at aught, it was coming from the Earth itself, deep beneath the crust, near a patch of land long erased from modern maps.
The valley was hard to find now as well as I can't have roots, but when she stood on the ridge and looked down, she felt it immediately. Hum was there, waiting, rolling through the soil like thunder half asleep. Her boots sank into the ground as the earth itself wanted to keep her there. At the valley heart, she found the forge. It was nothing but stone walls now, a hollow outline filled with moss and memory, but the anvil remained. It didn't shine or gleam, it pulsed. Faint, subtle, like the last ember in an endless fire. She knelt beside it and set her recorder down.
The screen flickered, then froze. This disguises an before. Across it, 3 words wrote themselves again. Earn slow, give often, leave early. Alina laughed, startled and tearful at once. So it's you, she said softly. You're still healed. She reached out and touched the billable. The hum grew stronger. It vibrated through her bones, her heartbeat falling into rhythm with it. She closed her eyes, and in that moment saw flashes, faces she didn't know, voices she'd never heard, generations of hands tending the same fire across time. Not gods, not spirits, just people who finally stopped running. When she opened her eyes, the recorder was glowing again, but not at a screen. It was showing memories, not hers, the land, the faces of Alder, Ione, Lowell, Sarah, Ray, all there, flickering in the dim light like ghosts made of ember. They were working, smiling, speaking words she couldn't hear but somehow understood. Every one of them turned in the end toward her, nodding slow, like they'd been waiting for her to arrive. Then they were gone, and the hum softened again, content. Alina didn't try to record it. She didn't even try to explain it. Some truths shrink when you measure them. Instead, she set up camp by the Evel and stayed. She tended a new fire that had fallen branches, and when she had time, wrote her thoughts in a notebook. Her handwriting was shaky, but she filled page after page with reflections about time, about stillness, about what wealth might mean when there's nothing left to buy. The world mistook speed for wisdom. She wrote once, but wisdom a slower thing. It grows quiet, not loud. Months passed, seasons turned. Alina rebuilt the forge, not to restore it, but to remember it. Each stone she lifted, she spoke to, telling it stories of the world above, of machines that thought and people who forgot how to, and though she never saw another person for years, she never felt alone. The hum kept her company. It was more than sound, it was presence, it was proof. When her time came, she didn't write a farewell, she just left her notebook open on the Edvil. The last line read, "If you're hearing this hum, you're already forgiven." The wind closed the pages gentle like, as if tucking them to sleep. And then the forge glowed once more, not in fire, but in light pure and soft, breathing out through the valley and into the sky. That light rose higher than clouds, higher than satellites. The scientists in their labs watched their instruments flicker in, showing readings that broke every law they knew. But Alina's name appeared in their system only once, attached to a file labeled Origin Unknown. Inside was a sound file less than 3 seconds long, a single hum, low and warm, followed by the fainted whisper, "Wait," and so they did. Maybe for the first time in centuries, the world waited just for a breath, a long, full human breath. After that day, things began to change, not by command, but by quiet imitation. People started positing between tasks. Some companies stopped calculating profit by quarter and started measuring by impact. Farms turned back to crop rotation. Machines were programmed not just to work faster, but to rest. Even the cities, loud and bright, began building still hours, times when the power dimmed and everyone was asked to listen. No one traced it to dust water, not directly. But if you walked into the countryside late at night, turned your ear toward the wind, you might yet catch it. The hum, deep and steady, rolling across miles of soil and stone. And if you closed your eyes long enough to hear the rhythm beneath it, you'd realize it ain't a place humming, it's the world. The same world, remembering the first lesson that they're learned and the last they'll learn need. Earn slow, give often, leave early, because peace don't vanish, it waits, and the patient will always find it again. The hum never stopped after that. It became part of the very air, humming low beneath the noise of progress, a heartbeat buried inside the machinery of the new world. No one remembered where it came from anymore, no one except those rare few who still carried patience like a flame cupped in their hands. But even among them, the story of Dustwater had slipped into myth, a bedtime tale told by the old to quiet the restless dreams of the young. They'd say, "There a place somewhere beyond the maps where the earth still breathes in time with man. If you listen close, you can hear it sing." And though most smiled politely at the notion, every now and then someone would go looking. One of those was a boy named Cal. He grew up in a world that had forgotten silence completely. Every wall talked, every watch blinked, every voice was measured by a dozen devices before it was ever truly heard. He didn't hate it. He just didn't understand how people could live with so much noise. His teachers called him distracted. His friends caught him slow. But really, he was listening to something else. He'd lie awake at night, staring out the window of his small apartment, waiting for the hum he'd heard once in a dream. It was not such sound. It was peace wearing the shape of a song. When he turned 17, he left home without a word. He didn't pack much, just a notebook, an old compass, and a broken radio that once belonged to his grandfather. He walked where the road still dared to lead, through stretches of farmland that had long since been replaced by towers and turbines. Everywhere he went, he listened, to the wind, to the dirt, to the static hissing from that useless old radio. Weeks passed and he found nothing, but one night, camping out under a sky thick with lightning, the radio crackled to life. The storm had killed every other frequency, but there was again the hum, low, warm, steady. He froze and smiled. "I hear you," he whispered. The hum led him through the storm, his boots sinking into the mud as the thunder rolled above. By dawn, he stood on the ridge of a valley he didn't remember walking into. The rain had stopped and the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. The grass bent toward the center of the valley, on Houghton the same way. If the earth itself was showing him where to go, he followed it slow, steady, reverent. At the heart of it all stood the ever-old crack, worn thin by centuries of hands, but still humming. Cal approached it the way a man approaches truth, nervous, hopeful, unsure if he deserves it. Laid his palm on the cold metal and felt the vibration climb up his arm. His heartbeat matched it, then slowed to the same rhythm. He knelt there a long while, eyes closed, until he felt the tears on his cheeks. "You waited," he said. The hum answered, low in time, like a father saying, "I always do." He found the journal, too, half buried near the roots of the oak. It was full of names, thoughts, lessons, sketches of the valley, drawn by hands long turned to dust. But at the very end, in fresh ink that hadn't even faded yet, was a line that read, "The world still loud, but patience always whispers loud enough for those who care to listen." He smiled at that. "Guess I cared enough," he said. He spent the next few years tending the forge, learning what it meant to live slow. He didn't rebuild much, just what needed mending. He planted wildflowers where the ground was bare, set small stones in a circle where the fire once burned bright. Every morning he'd stand before the anvil and hum back to it. At first it was just noise, but after a while his voice found the pitch, the pulse, the harmony. The valley answered, the air vibrated with that shared tone, as if the whole place was breath and time with him. It wasn't a miracle, it was memory made alive. When travelers stumbled into the valley again, drawn by rumor or dream, they found Cal waiting. He didn't speak much. He just handed them food, a place to sit, and a moment to remember themselves. Sometimes that was enough to change a person's life. A businesswoman once came looking for the secret of patience. She left 3 days later without a word, leaving her watch behind. A soldier wandered in one winter, scarred and silent, and by spring was laughing again. Cal never asked where they came from. Dustwater never did. It just gave them the time the world refused to. As years passed, Cal grew older. His hair went gay, his hands rough and scarred, but his eyes stayed bright. Every sunset, he'd sit beneath the oak with the journal open on his lap, writing not lessons but thanks. For the rain he'd write, for the quiet, for the weight he'd hum while he wrote and the valley would hum back, the tones stretching up into the dusk like a prayer without words. One night near the end, a small group of wanderers came to the valley, a family this time, a man, a woman, and their little girl. Cal welcomed them, the same for the others. The girl was curious, running from root to root, her laughter filling the air. When she reached the anvil, she placed her small hand on it just as he had all those years before. Her eyes widened. "It's singing," she said. Cal smiled, feeling something deep in his chest. "Stir one last time. Then it remembers you," he told her. "Don't forget its song." He passed the next morning sitting upright by the forge, the journal still open beside him. The last thing he'd written was all 4 words. "The hum goes on." It did. The family buried him beneath the oak, same they those before, then stayed a while longer to tend the fire. The little girl kept humming, her voice soft and pure, and she did. The valley seemed to shimmer, but the air itself was smiling. Years later, when she grew old enough to wander on her own, she left Dustwater to tell the story in. Not with sermons, not with speeches, just with a hum. She'd hum while she worked, while she walked, while she waited. And people listened. They didn't know why it moved them, but it did. Because that hum carried centuries of patience, of kindness, forgiveness, of all the souls who learned that the richest life is the one lived slow and given freely. Somewhere on quiet nights when the rain fell steady and soft, if you listened close enough, you could hear it too, the hum of Dustwater, still rolling through the world, whispering the creed that built forever out of time. Earn slow, give often. Leave early, the hum found its way into places far from the valley, slipping through cracks in the noise, like rainwater through old stone. It drifted down alleys where the forgotten slept, through train stations where travelers never met eyes, through the endless sprawl of cities that had long stopped, looking up at the stars. Some said it was just the sound of wind in the cables or static on an old power line. But those who paused, really paused, heard something deeper. A rhythm, a breath. The earth reminding her children to slow down. In one of those cities built tall enough to scrape clouds and hollow enough to et, lived a man named Marcus. He worked in a high tower of glass and glare, spending his days trading nothing but numbers that didn't belong to anyone. He'd long forgotten what silence sounded to. Every hour of his life was scheduled down to the second, his wristwatch blinking reminders of who he was supposed to be. But one night, when the city lost power in a rare blackout, Marcus found himself sitting in darkness for the first time in years. No screens, no hum of servers, just the far-off sound of wind sliding between the towers, and beneath it, faint but sure, another hum. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't electrical, it was alive. He went to the window, looking out over the sleeping city, and realized the hum was coming from inside him. His heartbeat. Slow, steady, not demanding attention, just there, like it always had been. He laughed under his breath, and for the first time, it didn't sound forced. He turned off his watch. Then, one by one, everything else. The room stayed dark, but he didn't feel blind. He felt found. The next morning, he walked out of that tower and never went back. He didn't have a bed. He didn't even pack a bag. He just walked heading west, following the faint-ish pull in his chest that told him to keep going. Sometimes when the wind caught right, he'd hear that same hum again, far away, like a memory singing itself. Folks he met along the road thought he was lost, but he wasn't. He was returning. Weeks turned to months. Marcus followed rivers, old train tracks, trails half swallowed by grass. He slept under bridges and open skies alike. The further he got from the noise, the clearer everything felt. Food tasted better. Time stretched wider. The stars, he'd forgotten how many there were. One night he built a small fire by a creek and stared into the flames, thinking of nothing and everything all at once. And when he heard it then, the hum, steady and strong, rolling through the ground beneath him. He followed it until the trees opened up, and there, under the moon, stood the old forge. The oak towered above it, age-lace and calm. The anvil gleamed faintly in the firelight. He felt his knees weaken, his breath catch. He didn't need a sign or a map. He knew exactly as he was, so it real, he whispered, voice trembling with a kind of awe he'd forgotten men to feel. He set his hands on the anvil, feeling the hum rise through his arms, spread to his chest, settle behind his ribs. "It's you," he said softly. "It always been you." He stayed. Not for a day, not for a week. He stayed until the seasons turned. He rebuilt the forge brick by brick, using old techniques he'd learned from strangers along the road. Didn't force the land to change. He just helped it remember. Every night, he'd light a small fire and sit with it in silence, listening to the hum. It didn't talk back. It didn't have to. Its answer was the peace that wrapped around him like an old coat. He wrote in a notebook he'd found near the roots of the oak. His words weren't about numbers or systems or profit. They were about patience, about learning that the richest kind of success comes when you stop looking for it. The world don't owe you peace, he wrote one evening, and it offers. Is quiet and humble, but only if you stop long enough to listen. He'd write until the fire burned low, then hum himself to sleep. People started finding him just like before. Travelers, wanderers, runaways, and dreamers, they thought him the man of the hum. He never claimed to be a teacher. I just keep the fire lit, he'd say, but he listened. Lord, did he listen? He listened to their stories, their hurts, their hopes, their silence, and every one of them left lighter than they came. He never took credit for it. He always pointed to the anvil, that the real teacher, he'd say, had been waiting longer than you've been hurt. Years passed, the world out kept changing faster, brighter, colder, but dust, water stayed slow. Marcus grew old then, though he never felt it. He moved slower, sure, but he didn't fight the stillness. He wore it like armor. Each sunrise he'd whisper the creed like a prayer. Earn slow, give often, leave early. When his last winter came, he sat by the fire with a young boy who'd come wandering in from the road. A boy who reminded him of himself. You hear that? Marcus asked, nodding toward the forge. The boy nodded. Good, Marcus said, smiling. That patience, that life saying it ain't in a hurry. Don't let the world trick you into rushing what was meant to be. Tended. The boy nodded again, his eyes wide with wonder. What happens when it stops humming? He asked. Marcus chuckled. Then you start. That night Marcus passed in his sleep, the hum rolling soft and warm through the valley. The fire flickered low. When the boy woke, he found a note on the anvil written in shaky but strong script. The hum don't belong to me. It belongs to whoever listens next. So the boy stayed. And when travelers came, he welcomed them. When the storms rolled in, he kept the fire dry. When the nights grew cold, he hummed until dawn. The world never stopped changing, but neither did dust water. It stayed the same kind of forever that don't depend on time. Because long as there's one person willing to stop and listen, the valley don't need to be found. It's already alive. The hum keeps going, moving through the soil, the sky, the hearts of the still and the kind. You can't bury that kind of truth. You can only remember it. And somewhere, right now, while you're reading these words, that hum's still there, low, steady, patient. The sound of a world that learned long ago how to forgive itself, earn slow, give often, leave early, always and forever.